a different setting. So please bear with me if I look like I am trying to do lots of things at once, because I am. I don't have anyone sitting next to me, which is a bit strange. So I have Cyrus who can communicate with me, but if I do sort of look away for a few seconds, it's because I'm just figuring out what's happening in the background. So just please note that today's meeting is live streamed, and if you need to leave the meeting, please let myself or Democracy Service Advisor know that you're leaving the meeting. We will have a break today from 11 till 11:10, just a quick break to go and have something to drink and have a bit of a stretch. And then from 12:30 to 1, we're going to have a half-an-hour break so that you can go and have some lunch. It's important that we do that. We need to make sure that we look after ourselves. We have busy days, and we do have a workshop this afternoon at 2 o'clock. So I'm just wanting to make sure that we do get a break. But I'm not anticipating that this meeting will run over time, as we have had the item 2.2, the Omāroro Reservoir. That paper has been withdrawn and will be brought back to the next Strategy and Policy Committee meeting, which is not next week, but the week after. So I am anticipating that we should be able to be well within time today. I just want to see call if we have any apologies for today's meeting. No. So being that we have no apologies, I'll move on. Are there any conflicts of interest declarations today? Okay, and confirmation of minutes. I move the motion that the Strategy and Policy Committee approve the minutes of the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting on the 12th of March 2020, having been circulated, and that they be taken and read and confirmed as an accurate record of that meeting. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Matthews. So now that we have that seconded, we will put that to the vote. So if you can vote accordingly, please, that would be good.
Just waiting on the mayor.
Just say yes. I'm just trying to get back to the right button.
That's unanimous.
Great, thank you. Now we don't have any items not on the agenda, so we will move on to public participation. So we have a few people here today who want to speak to us all about the public hire electric scooter evaluation. So we've got one kaupapa that we're hearing about today, and we have 7 public participants this morning, and we have had an addition at 10:05 from Alan Blake from Walking Streets Aotearoa. So, but we will begin with Brad Olsen. Tēnā koe, Brad. Welcome, and you'll have 5 minutes, and if you do want to allow some time for questions, I think that would be really helpful. But yeah, thanks for being here today. And I just should confirm, in case someone didn't hear on the way in, at 4 minutes, you'll get a wee reminder from who's doing the timing today, Cyrus? Is that?
I will be.
You'll be doing, so you'll give a reminder at 4 minutes, and then once you get to 5 minutes, I'll be saying it's time to start wrapping up now. So, thanks, Brad.
Kia ora, Councillor Day. Thank you very much, and good morning, councillors. I'll try and keep this brief. I guess just coming to you today in a personal capacity rather than any other of the hats I wear, and just wanting to strongly support the moving forward with the e-scooter public share program, and wanting to see it, I guess, modified slightly, of course, to make it better fit Wellington, but very much wanting to support it moving forward. Of course, some big changes coming through in recent times, but the thing that remains constant is people wanting to move around Wellington. And I guess just making the point that as a young Wellingtonian myself, and someone that submitted on this when it first went to council a year or so ago now, was very supportive then and remain supportive of it going forward. The e-scooters give young people a great mobility option moving forward. Of course, young people not having the same options often to other private transport methods. And of course, it also adds, and certainly the papers you've received highlights that it adds vibrancy to Wellington. And as we move forward as a city, I'd like to see that continued. I guess I do want to highlight some of the safety considerations that have been made already. Of course, I very much support something like docking or parking areas, a very common sense change that I expect will actually not only add value to pedestrians, but actually e-scooter users themselves. And so again, looking for some of those common sense approaches is going to be quite important. I guess I also want to highlight the need, as this is going through the trading in public places bylaw, the need for a balanced approach as we move through this. Of course, this is a Wellington business on the line in many respects, and during an economic shock, I think it's important to remember, that the decisions that council makes does have quite large implications on private business. Of course, I'm not quite sure if right now is the right time to be making small business decisions from a council point of view, but regardless. I guess the last point I'd want to make in endorsing and putting forward e-scooters to move forward in Wellington is I'm aware there's a number of amendments that councillors are likely to propose. And I guess just highlighting that, of course, as a young person who's engaged in this space, I only heard about this from Councillor Condi on Twitter. And as well as that, of course, last time e-scooters went through council, there are a number of amendments which quite fundamentally changed the proposal and also saw council have to, I think, rescind one of its decisions. And I guess just making sure that as council considers its decision today, that it wants to keep in mind that need for balance when it decides conditions. And I guess just highlighting that overburdening everyone with a multitude of minute conditions could actually stymie this going forward, rather than enhancing the vibrancy of Wellington and allowing scooters to provide the critical service that they do. So with that, Councillor Day, I'll hand back and take any questions that councillors might have.
Kia ora, councillors. Do we have any questions for Brad? Kia ora, thanks. Councillor Pennant, you can go.
Thanks, Brad, for coming in, and thank you for giving the perspective of a young person. Can I just ask how you think at a policy level we balance the needs of younger people with older people and disabled people as well, who have indicated some concerns? Thanks.
Yep, I'm not muted. I guess, Councillor, it is a balance, and I guess that's why if we can find common sense approaches to make tweaks to enhance activities, I think that's important. I mean, certainly the feedback that seems to be coming through in council's own research demonstrates that while there are issues, they're not issues that would require, say, a wholesale removal of e-scooters, which I think is something that some quarters have pushed for. So I guess trying to make sure that where there is that balance, that it is what are the practical tweaks that can be made, and I think a number of people have put those forward, recognising that we need to ensure we look after our disabled and our elderly community, but equally, I guess, trying to understand how we can make it work for everyone. But also, Councillor, I'd make the point that, as I did last time round, we also need to trust Wellingtonians to do the right thing. There are a few, of course, in every circumstance that will make an issue and I guess create problems for everyone, but the vast majority, from what I can understand, participate well, and I guess needing to trust that those will continue to do so.
Thank you. We've got a question from Councillor Rush.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. We hear people talk about this vibrancy, and I'd like to understand what you mean by that, because scooters whizzing in and amongst people walking on Oriental Parade, to me, does not add vibrancy. It adds danger and makes challenges for people wanting to walk, which actually could reduce vibrancy. Can you maybe talk me through what you mean by vibrancy?
Yeah, absolutely. I see it to be, if I walk outside and see people having a good time on scooters, there's massive grins on people's faces. It just seems to add to the sense of, Wellington being a great place to hang out and I guess participate in. It's just being around people that are in a positive mood, and certainly all of my interactions with scooters, both on them and observing them, has been that. I guess as well, as we see people zipping in and out of the likes of Oriental Parade, I mean, we have that anyway with people on a range of other transport options that council doesn't have the same control over. So I guess, again, it comes back to trying to trust our people a bit more. I've probably been one of those people that you may have considered zooming in and out of pedestrians. I've always made sure, though, to slow down as I come around people and to give as many people a wide berth. I suspect it's better to sort of dip in and out of pedestrians than try and just sort of haul through them. And again, I guess, what are the common sense options we could have there? People putting forward the idea of a white line or similar to delineate traffic in Oriental Parade could be an option to look at.
Kia ora, ngā mihi ki a
Thanks.
koe I Brad, I te whakaro. Thank you for coming today to share your thoughts with us. We really appreciate that. You can stay and watch, after the public participation, you can go and watch online. So the link is shared. Thank you. Kia ora, who are we up to? Nau mai Carl Bennett from Youth Council. Thank you for coming today to share your whakaro with us. So same thing, 5 minutes. It'd be great if you leave a few minutes for some time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's good to be here. All right, so I just want to quickly summarise Youth Council's position and give you some more specific recommendations on things we'd like to see changed. So firstly, completely agree with what Brad Olsen had to say there. And I'd like to reiterate that, yeah, overall, Youth Council really sees e-scooters as being a positive addition to Wellington. Of course, they're not without their faults, but we believe that through adaptation of what we're currently doing, we can get to a place where e-scooters are safe and add vibrancy to Wellington overall. So hopefully you've had a chance to see the document that was sent through this morning. We've outlined a few recommendations of that document, which I'd like to go through now. So the first of those recommendations of how I would like to see this scheme adapted was the introduction of more dedicated e-scooter parking at popular destinations. So this is something along the lines of what we currently have at the train station. We believe like these, that's just common sense. Having these dedicated places where you can drop off scooters is good for the riders because they know where to go to park. It's not a decision they have to make. It's good for people who want to find an e-scooter because they condense them into one spot. And it's good for the pedestrians as well because it means we've got less clutter on our footpaths. I would like to add one caveat. I think that a lot of the utility of e-scooters comes from the fact that you can go directly to your destination and just drop them off there, unlike a bus where you have to go to the nearest bus stop or a car where you have to go to the nearest car park. And so I wouldn't be in favor of requiring that such dedicated parks are used. But I believe that if they're provided, in the majority of cases, people who are ending rides in that area would use them anyway, especially if the $1 off incentive is continued. Moving on to the next point, there have been a few safety restrictions put in place when the scheme was started that we believe have been having some perverse consequences that might not have been foreseen. One of those is the automatic speed restrictions that are put in place around Wellington Hospital. Of course, we don't want e-scooter riders zooming past people coming out of the hospital doors. That I don't for a second think that that's what I'm asking for here. The problem is the automatic enforcement of them. So this is actually a case I've encountered myself. So one time going down Redford Street outside the hospital, I was trying to stay away from the pedestrians on the footpaths, and therefore it was riding on the road. It was fairly congested, traffic wasn't moving too fast, so 25 k's an hour was okay. There wasn't too much of a discrepancy between my speed and the speed on the road. The problem is, as soon as I came close to the hospital, my speed was automatically reduced without my expectation to 10 kilometers an hour, right? And I'm suddenly in the middle of Redford Street with a bus behind me going at 10 k's an hour. It wasn't the best situation. So of course, then like having narrowly avoided that bus, I end up on the footpath closer to the pedestrians everyone was trying to protect. So we think this is a little, this isn't the end result that anyone was looking for. So our recommendation here is either to just remove the automatic enforcement of the speed limit, or if we must have the automatic enforcement, at least provide some. One recommendation could be that we require that the e-scooter providers look into some sort of auditory warning prior to the speed restriction coming into place. So at least then riders have an option to get off the road safely onto a place where they can safely go at a lower speed. Moving on from that, there are a few places around Wellington that where footpaths just clearly weren't designed for e-scooters. Nobody's fault, they were designed a long time ago, long before e-scooters were around. But we think they should be addressed. It would be good if some of these issues could be addressed now, just to make it a bit safer for e-scooter riders on footpaths. So one such case where where the footpaths aren't really accessible to e-scooters at all. There's a few barriers on footpaths I think were designed to reduce to force cyclists off the footpaths onto the road. So one such example is coming out of the Mount Victoria Tunnel in Hataitai. There are barriers on the footpath there. These are fine for bikes, right? They should be on the road. But for e-scooter riders who have every right to be on the footpaths, these don't make a whole lot of sense. They're also not great for other wheeled users on the footpaths, such as those using prams. This barrier I'm talking about is right outside the childcare centre. As well as that, there are a few
You've got
cases,
1 minute. 1 minute each.
almost at the end. There are a few cases in a few places in Wellington where our footpaths suddenly become stairs, which is not great if you're barreling towards these on an e-scooter. So some of these could be fixed really, really easily with like a simple sign warning users that there are stairs coming up, or even just a bit of paint on the footpath. Again, just highlighting that this is coming up. So yeah, overall, we really think they have made a positive effect on Wellington, which we would just like to see some of the some tweaks around the edges to improve safety measures.
Kia ora, we do have a time for one question. He Pātai Simon Wolf has a question.
Yeah, hi there, Carl. You mentioned about the speed limit being dropped from what it was to 10 on the hospital footpaths. Do you think that 10 km/h around the hospital footpaths is a reasonable speed?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I fully agree that is an appropriate speed around the hospital. The problem is just the automatic enforcement of it when somebody's on the road outside the hospital.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, tēnā koe, Carl. Thank you very much for coming in and sharing your whakaaro with us today. We really appreciate that. And also stay and watch public participation still, and then watch from online after. No, my Oliver Bruce, welcome. Thank you for coming in today to talk to us, or coming into Zoom to talk to us. Same thing, so 5 minutes if you want to allow time for questions, that's within the 5 minutes. Kia ora.
Marvelous. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me in to speak with you today. I really appreciate it. I did present a short presentation. I wanted to look, largely a lot of the comments that I was going to make have been made by others. There's nothing specific kind of that I wanted to add. So what I thought I might do is just use a little bit of my time to talk through the wider context of the scooter trial. And as a little bit of a background about who I am, I think I'm going to slide number 2. My background's at Uber. When I left there, I founded something called the Micromobility Podcast. We cover news from around the world in the micromobility sector. I'm a Wellingtonian based here, but we run conferences in San Francisco and Berlin. And more recently, I've been the lead researcher on the micromobility study that the NZTA is undertaking, looking at potential mode share adoption that will be enabled by micromobility, so electric bikes and scooters. If we could just shift to slide 4. So what is micromobility in the kind of wider context? It's really electric utility vehicles that are lightweight. And so that kind of shifts everything from what we have with you can see Vicky back on a scooter there, through to electric bikes, these sort of moped cruiser things, 3-wheeled enclosed e-bikes, which is that vehicle that you can see there, through to this motorbike here that's a fully enclosed cabin motorbike. And we can see that there's a sort of a whole gamut. And when I say we, I mean this is the team that I work with at Micromobility Industries and do the consulting with. I want to stress something that's really interesting to note about this new form of technology. If we can move to slide 5 there. And that's that this is evolving incredibly quickly. So you can see there that was on the left, that was the first sort of scooter that was designed and used. It was consumer hardware. It wasn't really deployed, wasn't meant to be deployed kind of on the street. And you can see there on the right where we've got to in 18 months. So that was the new Jump scooter. Obviously not going to be released now that Jump's been acquired by Lime, but the kind of, you can see a lot of adoption there. You've got a larger front wheel to make it safer. It's got swappable batteries, which mean that the operational cost is a lot lower. It's got integrated cameras. So for example, it can do things like sense when it was coming up close to people and be able to slow down if there was going to be a collision. And that technology is really similar to a lot of what we see in our smartphones. And that's the sort of technology we can see that's coming down the pipe. If we can just move on, I want to give the kind of also the context as well into which these new vehicles are coming into our city. So if we just go to slide 7. Which is that, you know, specific to Wellington, we're a highly congested city. I mean, we add on average 15 to 20 minutes per half an hour commute on either side. And we're, you know, obviously with Transmission Gully coming online, we're going to be seeing a substantial amount of congestion increase in the city, which is why we're even talking about things like congestion pricing, and obviously the work that we're doing in Let's Get Wellington Moving. And yet when you look at it, how do we use our trips in Wellington? How do people actually get around? If we go to the next slide, most of our trips are actually short trips. And yet, and if you go to the next slide there, you can see that with these micromobility devices, most of the trips that are taken on them, and this is the case in Wellington, it's the case in San Francisco, Paris, etc., around the world, you end up with these scooters actually ending up being used for very, very short trips. And in Wellington, we actually have some of the highest trips per scooter per day. So Jump, and it's all of its global markets that it operates, has indicated to me by friends of mine who work there that it's one of the highest trips per day that we'll see out of all of the scooters globally, in terms of the numbers of trips that they do. We're a highly dense little city, and we're incredibly well suited to micromobility. I want to leave time for questions, so I'm just going to skip to that final slide number 13 there. Sorry, slide number 13. Which is that as we think about this, I really just want to stress that micromobility, one, it's here to stay. It's, you know, these vehicles, the shared scooters are kind of obviously important, but in the wider context, the future of electric vehicles in Wellington is actually going to look more like these scooters than it is going to look like Teslas. And there's more and more of them coming. So we need to work out how to accommodate them and encourage them, because they're going to make the city a far better place to be. So look, with that, I'll leave some time for questions for folks who might have any.
Kia ora, Oliver. It looks like we have a question from Mia Foster. Thank you.
Kia ora, Oliver. Thank you for that. Two quick questions if I can. The first one of them is you're involved with Uber, and as I understand it, Lime has taken over the Uber operations here. I just wondered if there's any difference that you might be able to highlight in terms of the way in which the operating standard is. The second one is there's been some desire around having sort of docking stations and recharging stations, but if you could just highlight the way in which the operation will work, whether it's taking the scooters to a third location to recharge them, or just putting in batteries, or if they actually need a charging station on street.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So to answer your first question, look, the Lime team are really good operators, and they've learned a lot being operators here in New Zealand. They're the largest company globally in terms of the operations that they do. And I know that a number of the team from Jump are going to be going over to Lime. So I would say that they're going to be as good as quality operators. They've learned a lot in New Zealand about how to operate and work with councils. That would be the answer to the first question. Regarding the second question around charging, I've done a number of interviews with people who build charging stations, with companies that use charging stations. My take on charging station is at the moment the technology is still adapting very fast, and it's always a little bit challenging to go and want to kind of retrofit or put in infrastructure that, like in today's world, for technology that's moving very quickly. And so any parking infrastructure that I think we should be building shouldn't be for charging specifically. I actually think that as we move, I can see already happening with a lot of the scooters around the world, and you can see it happening in Auckland now. These scooters that are coming in have swappable batteries, and actually that obviates the need for those charging for that parking infrastructure to have charging integrated with it.
No, thank you. Thanks very much for that.
Kia ora, Oliver. Ngā mihi mō tō whakaaro. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. You'll probably have seen there were lots of questions for you, but councillors, I encourage you to contact Oliver. We've got his email information because you have sent us information before, so feel free to get in touch and ask Oliver those questions. No, Maya Cleve Cameron from Big Street Bikers. Thanks for coming along today to talk with us on Zoom. Same story, 5 minutes. If you want to leave time for questions within that, that'd be great. Thanks.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks for having me along. I've got a few slides here. You can see first of all that I'm wearing a biker's hat, but our vision of Big Street Bikers is of a network, electric mobility network for happier, healthier streets across Aotearoa, and so we see micro mobility as a whole. And we've got a clip-on solution for secure parking for scooters, which could really help out with the issues in Wellington. And so that's part of our Locky Dock network. So I'm going to just show a few quick slides, but hopefully get to some questions pretty quickly. So thank you. So smart city infrastructure for healthy transport. So our Locky Dock model includes media and infrastructure. It's secure parking primarily. There's a charging option there, but it's fundamentally about providing a secure parking space for public and private bikes, scooters, skateboards, hoverboards, what have you. But it's about establishing the footprint and the zones and the behaviour for tidying up our streets like this. So if we move to the next slide. Thanks. So a little background about ourselves. We're a New Zealand-owned social enterprise. We're working in partnership. We have over a number of years with Mercury Energy across the country, with Waka Kotahi, NZTA, and with Fernton Bill Stickers, who provide the media side of our operation. And we're doing this to establish an urban transport network, or an electric mobility network that's better for the well-being and wallets of everyday Kiwis and the planet. We see transport as number one thing to solve in our cities that creates more space and happier streets. So we move to the next thing. So in terms of a pilot for Wellington Central, our model delivers it. So Locky Docks delivers them free to the public and free to the property owner, whether that's council or private property owners. It's an immediate solution. It could be part of the solution in terms of where to park scooters. We can clip on, I'll show you soon, there's special docks where scooters could go, could help alleviate some of the issues there. See that it's a great way to actually put in infrastructure that really delivers on Te Ata Kura in terms of carbon zero plans for the city, and we're using proven technology. These are all through Europe. If we move to the next screen, thanks. So here's some images. So the first image on the left there is the Locky Dock stations we have installed in Christchurch. I'm in Christchurch here today, and it's pretty exciting, the engagement already with the Locky Dock station. So secure park and charging for bikes, scooters, skateboards that go on there. The media makes it free to the public and free to the locals. And free to the property owner. And NZTA have maps on there showing where the bike paths are going, so which is a fantastic thing to create more awareness about how to safely ride around the city, whether it's a bike or a scooter. To the right there's showing the clip-on docks that we can add onto these Locky Docks, and that's specifically designed for parking scooters. These ones here that you can see aren't charging. They're just it's just a secure stand that puts all the scooters in a nice tidy place. They can be charged, but again, as to Oliver's point, it's about establishing the footprint and the behaviour for this to, for the 21st century ways of transport to occur naturally. And okay, next slide, please. And so there's the last slide just showing of Locky Dock here in Christchurch. And all set to go for Wellington. We have been in discussions with Victoria University, the hospital, Greater Wellington, are very enthusiastic about it, and number of people, officers in the council as well. So I'd love to take some questions.
Kia ora, Cleve. I think we have time for one question, and that will be from Deputy Mayor Free.
Yeah, I'm really not keen on those big TV screens, but I noticed that you had a smaller version. Does your system have to come with that very large television screen with the advertising?
No, it's very modular. So they're scaled to size to fit. We can have different sizes. They're not as big as they look. There's huge.
I've seen them. I know exactly how big they are. Yeah. Okay, but the smaller one that you showed with just the scooter installation, is that a possibility rather than the bigger? Yeah.
Absolutely. And we can have scale the number of docks that are on there as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Kia ora, Cleve. Thanks for coming in today, for sharing your interesting business. And I can see there are some more questions, but we don't have time today. But yeah, hopefully people will contact you after if they have any things that they want to follow up with. Thank you. Nau mai Marco Garlick from Generation Zero. Welcome this morning. So it's same thing, 5 minutes. If you do want to allow time for questions, then it needs to be within the 5 minutes. So thank you.
Kia ora, Jill. Kia ora, everybody. Yeah, I'm speaking on behalf of Generation Zero. You've seen me before on these calls. We think that e-scooters have a big potential to let people zip around the city and reduce car dependency and fight emissions. And I think that you have a really good report there with a good job of analyzing all the pros and cons. And we think that proceeding while making some big changes is the right way forward. And so we made a submission with lots of some niche recommendations, but I'm just going to focus on three big points. First one is data. I think that is really good with this trial model to keep using that data. That's showing how you do trials properly. So well done on that. Great job. I think it also shows some of the deficiencies in our current travel system. So why are people taking e-scooters along the Golden Mile when you have so many buses per minute? And I think some of these travel patterns can help us think about some of the problems with bus bunching, with the need for a second transit corridor in the city, and using this as a proxy for some of the other walking or public transport issues in the city. And also thinking about, why do so many people use the waterfront? Well, it's the only place that you're segregated from other modes of transport. So again, the data is useful, and to think about how we can make changes, not just to e-scooters, but to other modes of transport as well. The second one is equity. I think the data from the trial is pretty clear that overwhelmingly the use of e-scooters has been detrimental for disabled people and other vulnerable users of footpaths. So we strongly believe that there needs to be some changes to address this concern. So we do support, technological measures like GPS speed limits or riding campaigns, but remember that those are the least effective interventions, and the best interventions are making it safe by design. So the third and biggest point is space. It's all about space. And so to unleash that power of e-scooters that we've been hearing about, there really needs to be a commitment to segregated infrastructure. So that means lower speeds. And so the Let's Get Wellington Moving 30-kilometer speed limit is great, but also traffic calming, car-free streets, traffic reduction. I didn't see that being a big part of the report document, and I think that needs to be front and center, because you're fighting against physics, that you have cars, micromobility, and pedestrians, and those three shouldn't mix, because they have different mass and speed properties, right? And also for parking, we're agnostic about the solution here. We don't mind whether they're painted squares or docks or whatever. They just need to be visible, consistent, and available. They need to be everywhere. And there needs to be some system where I think probably parking wardens can fine the companies themselves for parking scooters in the wrong location, and that can then incentivize the companies to encourage users to park them in the right spot. They just need to be away from the footpath and in more like designated areas. So we recognize the Lockyer Doc's proposal sounds like a good idea, but again, we're agnostic on the solution. And I would just say also consider some shelter for any parking there for the rain, given that it's electric scooters and stuff like that. So we strongly believe that there must be a solution to parking and segregated infrastructure as soon as possible. So I'll open up to questions.
Kia ora, Marco. I don't think we have any questions at the moment. I think probably people have asked quite a few already, and we've got to 5 minutes. So thank you so much for coming in today to share your whakaaro with us. It's really helpful to have your perspective, and feel free to watch through live stream.
Thank you.
Nomai Nick Highland from Flamingo Scooters. Thanks for being here this morning to kōrero with us. So 5 minutes, and if you can include time for questions, that'd be great. Thanks.
Cool, thank you. So yeah, we're a local company started here in Wellington, and we set out with the goal to provide a transport option that lowers carbon emissions, reduces the reliance on cars, and provides a first and last mile connection with public transport. We're very privileged to be a part of this Wellington e-scooter trial. Next slide, please. So over the 6-month trial period, we had 270,000 rides by nearly 42,000 people. We're being overwhelmed by the support from Wellingtonians in adopting e-scooters at a time where transport makes up 58% of Wellington's greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So we have a number of safety measures and initiatives in place to ensure e-scooters are safe for both riders and pedestrians. So this is the value that we can offer to you as a council, that we're able to impose safety requirements and influence user behaviour in ways that would not be possible with privately owned e-scooters. So using GPS and geofence technology, we've been able to create and enforce no riding, low speed and no parking zones. So also every scooter has a unique and visible registration number to allow members of the public to report inappropriate riding or parking. So our scooters also have built-in fallen down sensors to ensure they're kept clear of walkways and entrances. We also have our on-ground team to respond to any parking complaints and to relocate any poorly parked scooters. And our platform also provides council with heat maps of popular ride routes, trip start and finish locations. So this kind of information can enable better planning of infrastructure like dedicated parking areas and cycle lanes. Next slide, please. So we're always looking for ways to improve, and there are a number of things we're currently working on. To begin with, our safety awareness and education campaigns were quite broad. We looked at encouraging riders to wear helmets, give way to pedestrians and park considerately. We're now looking to run some more specific awareness campaigns dedicated to ensuring Wellingtonians know the rules of the Golden Mile and so on. We currently have in-app training and safety information available to the public in our apps and on our website. We've run a number of safety events where people can come along to learn how to safely ride an e-scooter. We've held one on our launch day, one to raise funds for breast cancer, one at the Newtown Festival, and multiple at Hurricanes games. As Wellingtonians become more confident riding flamingo scooters, we expect to see higher rates of customers choosing to ride on the road as opposed to the footpath. With the Accessible Streets package, we also hope to see e-scooters permitted to be used in cycle lanes. And of course, the enforcement of 30 km/h speed limits in the inner city, and allowing e-scooters to continue to travel at 25 km/h makes this all possible. In cities where low speed zones are more utilised, we've observed higher rates of riding on the footpath. Next slide, please. So a big focus for us moving forward is parking. So our team are always available throughout the day to relocate any improperly parked vehicles. We have a system to review parking photos, and we review hundreds every week. The system is used to incentivize those who are parking safely and then penalize those who are not. We support the idea of more dedicated parking areas, similar to the one at Wellington Railway Station. A single car park can be converted into space for up to 20 scooters. We currently remove the $1 unlocking fee for riders who end at Wellington Station, and we can offer similar discounts and incentives for parking in other parklets around the city in the future. Next slide. So over the next 6 months, we're looking to upgrade to a new scooter model, which can last at least 24 months. This new model features swappable batteries, which reduces the scooter transportation. We're also investigating the practicality of using e-cargo bikes to swap out batteries. And with these efforts, we can hope to become carbon neutral in 2021. So the last slide. So we'd like to see councillors vote in favour of option A and continue with public share electric scooter operations in Wellington. We see the e-scooters playing a vital role in the future of Wellington's transport network, and we're constantly adapting and improving as a company and hope to continue to grow our service and something that can work for all of Wellington. Thank you.
Kia ora, Nick. We do have some pātai, first from Councillor Paul.
Tēnā koe, Nick. Thank you for that presentation. I just want to say very briefly, I think it's incredible the job that you and Flamingo have done as young local entrepreneurs. I just wanted to ask, do you think the fact that Flamingo is local means that you can be more flexible and agile to the needs of the City Council and Wellingtonians? And second, do you think, so the paper talks about parking docks and parking infrastructure, do you think that, would Flamingo be open to working with the parking providers to find a scheme that might allow e-scooters to stay, parked up overnight or something similar to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're always working and adapting our business. I mean, just with COVID as well, we've had to develop all new systems that can monitor sanitisation of scooters throughout the day. And yet we're definitely here to work with any kind of future improvements and with any kind of parking operators to facilitate this.
Kia ora. Thank you. We will go to Councillor Sparrow.
Yeah, thanks very much for your presentation, Nick. I have 2 or 3 questions, but obviously only time for one, and that is the uptake in the suburbs. The 270,000 rides overall, what percentage of those would be in the CBD as opposed to the suburbs? I'm interested in knowing what percentage are in the suburbs, and has the uptake increased or decreased there over time?
I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, sorry, but I can email you afterwards. We do have heat maps of around the entire city. I'd say it's roughly about 25% in the suburbs and 75% in the CBD.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, kia ora, Nick. We're going to stop there because we have gone a little bit over 5 minutes, but thank you so much for coming in today. And obviously, councillors, you know that you can contact Flamingo if you have any other questions.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. No, my Alan Blake. I just need to start by apologising because I'm pretty sure at the beginning I said that you were representing walking streets Aotearoa, and while walking is the focus of the kaupapa, I'm pretty sure that streets don't walk. So I just want to correct it that it's living streets Aotearoa. And thank you so much for taking the time to come in to speak to us today. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
Well, kia ora tātou. Thanks for yet another opportunity to come and speak to the council. I think Zoom is fantastic, isn't it? It's a great way to hook in. And I think that I keep turning up at these meetings as just a testament to how much is happening in the space that is where pedestrians, the 200,000 pedestrians in Wellington hang out. So there's a lot of things happening in that space, and this is another one. And so I pretty much just wanted to come and say that this isn't really a decision about a business that hires e-scooters. This is just a decision about what we want for Wellington, how we want our city to look, and what we want to do with our public space, because the roads are our biggest public space and the footpath is the most precious. It's the place where the most things happen. It's where people walk, but it's also where people stop, talk, chat, hang out. Hopefully, more seats and nice places to sit soon as well, but it's our most precious public space in Wellington. So this is really a decision about where we want to see Wellington going and what we want to do with our public space. And I would like to say, don't forget people walking. Walking is free, so it's entirely equitable across the spectrum for people to use. It's healthy, it's the easiest thing to maintain your health. I so miss my walk to work during lockdown. It's been hard trying to think about going out for a walk. It's social, it's how people make things happen in Wellington is by bumping into each other on the street, except of course 2-metre bumps these days. But and it's so it's just it's a really good thing. So please think when you make these decisions that it's public space and it's for people who use that space. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Kia ora. Thank you, Ellen. I've got a question from Councillor Pennant.
Thank you, Ellen, for your unstinting advocacy in this space. So I presume that Living Streets continues to want segregated space for pedestrians and other kinds of users?
Yes, so it's really important to have footpaths that are for pedestrians. It's probably not so important for people like us who can all leap around and quite active, see, hear, think things really well. You really need to think about children. How are children going to cope with what's happening in their space? How are people with disabilities going to cope with what's happening in their space? How are older people going to cope? And I can tell you that none of them like e-scooters. In the same space as them, I think what we're saying is on the road, please.
Thank you. Councillor Paul.
Morena, Ellen, I was just wondering, so say we got some parking, some docking and parking infrastructure in for these commercial e-scooters. Obviously they can go anywhere. They could go on a car park, or they could go on a footpath or a open public space. But what are your thoughts about this? And I just was keen to hear your thoughts on that whole element of that infrastructure.
Yeah, thanks, Timothy. I think definitely we're keen for all the vehicles to get on the road and to share that enormous amount of road space we've got, so that there's much smaller footpath space is used for things that are productive. So anything that we can do to get e-scooters parking on the road would be great. Yeah, it's like any hire business, we're hiring e-scooters, we hire taxis. We think they should have a bit of space if that's where we want Wellington to go with them in the future, if that's the kind of model that we're after. So I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
Thank you. Mayor Foster, just your last question.
Kia ora, Ellen, lovely to see you. My question really is that what we've got in front of us is to allow the existing operators to continue till the end of the year, and then there's a whole bunch of work that needs to be done before we get to a more permanent proposition. And there's two things that are going to happen between now and then: a decision we've got to make on the 30k speed limits for the CBD, and then also whatever NZTA, etc., come up with on accessible streets. Have you got any thoughts about how life might look, assuming that A, we've got safer speeds, and B, NZTA come up with some new rules around accessible streets and micromobility on footpaths?
Thanks, Andy. Good question. 30 kilometres an hour is the #1 safety improvement that anybody can make in an urban area. So that is absolutely, if I can use the horrible term, a no-brainer. So just do it, and do it in as many places as you can. Who knows what accessible streets will turn up with. If the rules go ahead as they proposed, it will be, it will just make walking way worse. And I pity any local government that has to try and deal with the mess that they're making, because to try and manage what they're proposing is going to be very difficult. There will be traffic resolutions coming out of your ears to try and cope with some of that. But so hopefully that we'll see some sense in that, but I really can't predict what they're up to because I have no idea why they did it. So
thanks, Ellen. That's what I thought you would say, and I suspect you're probably right about traffic resolutions.
Well, ngā mihi, Ellen, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and answering our part. I really appreciate that. Ngā mihi hoki kia koutou i te manuhiri i tēnei rā. Thank you to all of our public submitters today, and we really appreciate people taking their time to come and talk to us. We know that everybody's really busy at the moment, so we thank you for doing that. And you're welcome to continue watching via live stream. The link has been sent to you by email, so thank you very much. We're going to move on with the meeting now. So I'd like to begin by suspending the standing orders. So I move under Standing Order 2.4, temporary suspension of standing orders, that we suspend the Standing Order 27.7, which is division, in order to allow the division to be recorded by a show of hands rather than taking down names by the Chief Executive. So we're actually going to do that through our voting system that we have now. And in accordance with Standing Orders 19.1, I wish to accord precedence to some items of business and announce that the agenda would be considered in the following order. So we're going to start with item 2.4, which is safer speeds, item 2.3, which is dangerous and insanitary buildings, and item 2.1, public hire of electric scooter evaluation. The reason we're doing that is to try and use our time efficiently so that we can have our breaks in accordance with that, because those the first couple of papers should be reasonably quick. But I am also going to, before item 2.3, dangerous and insanitary buildings, I'm going to allow some time for questions, because I think there are some questions that maybe councillors need to ask of officers. We didn't get a time to do that on Tuesday. So we will now move on to item 2.4. So this is a safer speeds hearing committee.
Jill, you need to actually put the resolution to suspend that standing order.
I do too, thank you. And I really appreciate you doing that, because I'm getting a message beside me from Democracy Services saying that, but of course I'm reading a piece of paper at the same time, so I really appreciate that, thank you. So we are going to put that to vote. This is the suspension of the standing orders so that we can vote online as we are now. So everyone, you know how to vote, we'll do that now. So quick, people are voting while I'm saying it.
Jill, did you need a seconder? I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Don't.
That's unanimous.
Right, that's unanimous. Thank you. Right, now we can move on. I've got a million bits of paper and screens that I've got here. So we will ask now Councillor Condi to introduce the report on safer speeds hearing committee.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Day. This paper, pardon me, this paper is just to extend the terms of reference for this established hearing subcommittee so that it can hear submissions on the safer speeds that are being proposed in the Karakia and Marsden Village areas, which will be coming up shortly. We'll be just amending the delegated authority so that we can consider those safer speed recommendations in that area. And that we've also agreed to proposing to amend the membership of the committee. Councillor Paul has generously offered to step down from the committee to allow space for Councillor Wolf to come on, since the Karakia and Marsden Village safer speeds areas will be in his ward, and he was really keen to be a member of the committee. So thank you very much, Councillor Paul, for agreeing to do that. And that's pretty much all I have to say about this. As you said, it's a pretty straightforward paper. I'll just call for a seconder, please.
Thank you. Councillor Matthews is going to second. Would you like to speak?
Yes.
Thank you.
Just briefly to say how excellent the Safer Speeds Committee hearings have been already, and the excellent work we've had supporting that from Democracy Services to run those online. We've had excellent submissions, so look forward to continuing that work and having Councillor Wolf's very local knowledge to support us as we go forward into Karakia.
Oh, kia ora, thank you for that. I can see we have Mayor Foster who would like to speak to this.
Yeah, look, thank you, and Councillor Condi, thank you for taking on board that we make sure that this change happens. It's a very sensible change, so thank you, Councillors Paul and Wolf for doing it. Can we just write the words round the right way, because it looks as though the way it's written that we're actually taking Councillor Wolf off and putting Councillor Paul on rather than the reverse. So if we can actually get the language right, will be good. But other than that, great. The intent is 100% right.
Thank you. It's good you've got sharp eyes there. So it will be that we're replacing Councillor Paul with Councillor Wolf.
Yep.
Is there any further debate, councillors? Looks like we can.
I just speak briefly, Jill?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Nate, it's Councillor Paul. I'll just say briefly that I will be stepping down, but because we cannot attend all the meetings, I'll still be tuning in, watching them on YouTube and listening to all the feedback and keeping my ear close to the street so I can hear all the feedback around the safer speeds. So just want to thank Councillor Wolf for also generously offering to put his expertise forward, and I know I'll still be able to be involved in this. Will allow me to put more time towards the city streets, part of Let's Get Wellington Moving. So ngā mihi koutou.
Kia ora. So I'll ask Councillor Condi, did you have a right of reply to what's been said? No, I think it's fairly straightforward. So what we will do now that we have a motion which has been moved and seconded, can we please vote accordingly?
Just waiting. Oh, and that's
unanimous.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so now councillors, we will move on to item 2.3, Dangerous and Insanitary Buildings Policy Review. So I will just, what we'll do now is we'll just have some time for questions. So we have Kate here with us today to answer our questions. I know we have a question from Councillor Fitzsimons. Would you like to ask your question now?
Yeah, thank you. And look, apologies, I didn't get this question in earlier. My question really is, I've got two questions. The first one is around the Tip Top building in Newtown by Countdown, which seems to me to be quite a dangerous building, and it is taking up, really important land right there in Newtown, in the heart of Newtown. And I guess I'm just interested, does it meet the threshold? What can council do? And is there a kind of, what are the steps towards taking action under this?
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, I suppose in terms of the policy itself, the threshold for what is deemed dangerous, is quite a high sort of a threshold. And I guess, there's an operational determination to figure out whether it meets that threshold. I can't really comment on a specific building, of course. Not sure whether Chris, who is on the line, has anything further to add about that particular building. But I guess that what we do like to make clear in the policy is that we do take these cases very seriously, and we do undertake to investigate dangerous or insanitary buildings situations very promptly. And there may be other pathways through issuing notices to fix, for example, where council can request that some action is taken by property owners.
Morning, councillors. It's Chris Scott here, Manager Building Compliance and Consents. Yeah, I just agree with Kate there. A building has to be considered in its whole context to be dangerous. So having an empty building may be the way of mitigating it being dangerous or meeting the requirements to take it out of being dangerous. So if it was being used and habitable, whatever else, by taking people out of it and isolating that building, that may satisfy it. So unfortunately, with buildings similar to the Tip Top building, if it's located and doesn't affect other buildings structurally, we're often very limited in what we can do. Yes, it may look terrible, and there may be some vandalism going on, but then that becomes the property owner's responsibility. Where we're able to go in under the legislation is just purely making sure that people that are lawfully on that property are protected. So in the case, I think, of that building, it's empty. It could have water running through it, but that doesn't necessarily make it dangerous, if you know what I mean, because it's not been occupied. So there's a whole lot of factors that must be weighed up before we can say a building's dangerous. And if it's fenced off and isolated, it may be an absolute eyesore, but it doesn't meet that threshold of being dangerous.
Thank you. And can I just check, just part of my question was as well, like, how would council know? Like, what would be the kind of, would you wait for a complaint from the public, or would you proactively go and do something? And then I've got one more question.
A little bit of both, councillor. So we do react to complaints, obviously, but also we've got buildings that we're aware of, and Tip Top being one of those. I don't know personally exactly where it's at, but I know it's a building of interest that we have quite a number of complaints about. So what we may do is do a visual assessment of the building. We may even require reports from the building owner. If they're not responsive, then we may look at getting some advice ourselves and then making a decision of what to do from there.
Thank you. My other question really is around the state of accommodation in Wellington. So I had an email this morning from some students who are living in a flat which is damp and cold and mouldy. And I just really want to understand whether the council is doing everything we can in terms of our public health powers or inspection powers in that area. And I thank you for the earlier advice about a possible amendment in that. I guess I know you work with MB, but what is it that the council can actually do to address the quality of housing in Wellington in terms of its the public health implications of cold, damp and unsafe housing?
I think it's a recognised issue throughout New Zealand that we have got some cold and damp homes. So we can look at things, new parts. So if any additions and that are done to a house, they obviously need to meet the building code. There are abilities for people to upgrade their properties, but we can't force people to do it. So that's why a lot of the work that's been done under the tenancies side of things and the government legislation around providing healthier tenancy homes and the tenancy sort of building warrant of fitness has all come in. So we do work ourselves, the public health team and MB often to try and find a resolution to some of these, but there is definitely a point that when people go into renting a flat or whatever it may be, they've got, obviously got some options about what they can go into. Obviously, then there's the financial thing, and you pay for what you get. We've got good landlords, we've got bad landlords. So we certainly do our very best to work across the different agencies to try and get it as best as we can, but we are somewhat restricted under the Building Act for, the building consent side of things about what we can trigger and when we can trigger those things.
So can we just get some advice on that precisely? Because I want to understand what our jurisdiction is and what our powers are and whether we're proactively using them effectively, because it feels to me like we're possibly not, and we could be a bit more proactive in promoting the requirements. So yeah, I'd be interested in some more advice on that, particularly coming into one. Yeah. And also some advice about the amendment that I sent you, sort of along those lines. And I appreciate that you might not have that now, but I would, it would be great to get that.
Yeah, we can summarise the work that's been done by MHUD as far as the healthy home standards, recent healthy home standards work goes.
I'm very interested in where council has jurisdiction to act and whether we're doing that. So making sure that the council is doing everything it can in terms of that public health monitoring of safe housing.
Hi Fleur, it's Moana here. Yes, we can get that piece of work to you, but our powers are very limited.
Yeah, I'm keen to understand that because I know that we work with MB, so I just don't understand the limitations. So yeah, thank you.
Sure thing. Yep.
Cool. Thank you. So on the speaker question order, I have Councillor Young, Mayor Foster, and Councillor Pennant. So Councillor Young.
So now that I'm back in my own little bubble, for those of you who've noticed that Fleur and I have split up, my computer's now back in action. So just going back to the Tip Top building. So, I mean, we know it's owned by Ryman and they're planning to put in a retirement village there. Surely we can use another arm of council and see where they are on the resource side, or indeed just speak to Ryman directly and say, what are you doing? I mean, they are a responsible public company.
Yeah, once again, I suppose it's more of an operational question rather than the detail of the Dangerous and Insanitary Buildings policy. So yeah, I don't know if Chris, you've got any comment on that.
Kate, that's okay. It's Moana here. Yes, we can follow that up, Nicola, and get back to you.
Yeah, because I mean, their public image would be pretty important to them, I would have thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Foster.
Look, thank you. So I'm coming from probably a fairly similar position to the questions that Fleur asked. And I guess my starting position is, are there any additional powers or any additional strength that we can give ourselves through this policy? And then there's three things that I particularly wanted to highlight. Does this also go to the insanitary situation? We had publicised in the media a month or so ago the situation in Millward Street, where I think we've been trying for about 5 years to get some sort of solution. So are there things that we can do to try and make that process quicker and more effective? The second part of that is where you've noted vandalism occurring, and we had that with the Allenby Terrace building as well, but that clearly means that people must be either accessing the buildings or going at least up to the buildings. Is there a point at which that vandalism starts, you actually saying, well, there are people going into a building which may not be particularly safe? Does that give us a trigger for action? And then the third bit is, and this may be under completely different legislation around emergencies, we've had situations where we've had slips affecting buildings. I certainly think of Priscilla Crescent. And does this in any way relate to those situations where, landslips starting to endanger a building or getting close to endangering a building? So is there anything we can write into this to help us in those situations?
So as far as those that Priscilla Crescent building that you mentioned, yes, the Dangerous and Insanitary Buildings policy was used in that case. So as far as being fit for purpose to apply to that type of situation, yes, I think it is. But I guess sort of just a general comment is that the reason for having this particular policy is really a specific requirement in the Building Act, where territorial authorities have to have one, and it's sort of limited in the sense that it's outlining you know, how we go about fulfilling our obligations under the Building Act. But really the key requirements are sort of in that primary legislation. I suppose Chris might have a comment about the vandalism situation, but one of the key powers under the Building Act for this policy is around restricting entry. So, you know, one of the first things that will be considered if a building is deemed dangerous or unsanitary is to put up fencing or hoarding so that people can't access the property. You know, it might not be fail safe, but that is one of the initial measures that is often taken in these situations. And the Millwood Street situation was also one where the Dangerous and Insanitary policy was applied. Yeah. Chris, did you have anything to add to that?
No, not really, Kate. I think you've got it. Yeah, we did apply the policy in all those circumstances. And you're right with regards to the fencing and the vandalism. We and building owners can often do as much as we possibly can to prevent access, but sometimes it doesn't deter your determined people to get access, and the police then are involved with us in managing that after that.
So look, I guess what I'm asking, I understand that what you're saying is that this is a requirement in law. I guess the question is, are we going as far as we can go to try and get the outcomes that we want to in terms of some of the buildings or some of the areas around buildings which are clearly less than optimal? Because if we can do more and make it more efficient and us more effective in dealing with those, then we should be doing that, shouldn't we?
Yeah, well, I suppose primarily from a policy perspective, if those buildings, you know, do meet that admittedly high threshold of dangerous and insanitary, as we sort of reviewed how the policy has gone over the last 5 years, the feeling was that yes, it does give us the tools that we need to sort of act quickly. And often it involves sort of working collaboratively with the property owners to get the problem sorted and quickly. So from a you know, perspective of, you know, does it give us the powers that we need? The feeling was pretty much yes, it does.
So Kate, the question is, could we give ourselves effectively more powers to be more effective, more efficient, and deal with those? Because by and large, it probably has worked fine, but we obviously see from time to time situations where we're getting outcomes which take longer to resolve than is desirable, and it means particularly the poor neighbours have to put up with that for, in some cases, I think the Millwood one was 5 years or something like that. Now that's pretty tough on anybody who has to be next to that sort of situation for that long. That is not an effective response.
Yeah, so I guess yeah, it's sort of working through the various stages of escalating the sort of situation and the enforcement powers that we might have. It does offer, you know, if we are to go through the courts in particular situations, that does take a long time, and generally the preference is to try and work alongside the property owner to sort of get the outcome that everyone's interested in.
I hear what you're saying, Kate, but I'm just trying to get, can we do more in this policy to give us more power? It's a moderately simple yes or no, I suppose. Because if we can do more, I'm interested in exploring what that looks like.
My sense is that the policy already gives, because it is sort of lining up with the powers that are given to us in the Building Act. My sense is that we've got the powers that the primary legislation enables us to have. Yeah, again, I guess from an operational perspective, whether Chris considers the powers are sufficient from an operational perspective would be another thing to ask, but our feeling was, having reviewed the policy, that it is working well, and that it gives us the tools that we need.
Thank you. Is that all the questions you've got, Mayor Foster?
I'm still waiting for a yes or no on that one. We're okay with it? Not, that wasn't a yes or no. Can we do more was the question.
Mayor, it's Stephen MacArthur speaking. Look, at the end of the day, the policy can't give ourselves more powers than the legislation.
I get that.
And therefore, this policy is written in the context of the powers that are given to us with the legislation. It's simply providing operational parameters for how we actually implement that policy. So look, I'm not across the detail of whether or not every power has been reflected in this policy, but
that's what I wanted to know. That's what I want to know. Have we gone as far as the legislation allows us?
I think if Kate can answer that question, we might be able to resolve your question.
Thank you.
Yes, is the answer to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Pennant.
Thanks. And look, Andy and Fleur, I'm obviously sympathetic to your questions. Kate, but my understanding is that the threshold is so high that it is for a very specific class of buildings. It's not to address all the numerous systematic problematic buildings in our country, leaky buildings, earthquake-prone buildings, buildings which will be impacted by climate change. Is that correct?
So again, I suppose it's just going back to the definition of dangerous and insanitary in the Building Act, and really it's around can people use buildings safely without endangering their health? Can they escape from a building if it's on fire? That sort of thing. So I think it is quite broad, and the proposed amendment, sort of contextual amendment, is really around saying there can be numerous causes of a building falling into a dangerous and insanitary state, and that the policy is really about enabling council to do something in that event, rather than what the cause might be. So those sort of operational determinations are around figuring out how dangerous is this particular situation? Is it life-threatening? Is this building in imminent risk of collapse? That kind of consideration.
Okay, so that's really important. So the test is life safety, essentially. So if a building, for example, has got a bit of mold in a sort of at 16 degrees of temperature rather than 20 in the winter, that wouldn't meet the threshold, even though that's not great.
Mecklenburgh Square in her 70s, and she was staff.
Yeah, and I suppose there's a body of case law behind all of this as well, because these cases can go through the courts, but really it is around that sort of higher threshold. You will have seen over the last 5 years we've had 14 properties where we've applied this policy. There are other mechanisms that can be used, as Chris mentioned.
Yeah. Okay, and just my last question is, look, I'm just a bit wary about adding in amendments to a specific policy to try and deal with another issue. So, if councillors were of the view that they want to take a stronger line on inspecting for, not less than ideally healthy homes, is there a way we can make that into a separate part and say that note that further advice, say, will be given at a later point about the different mechanisms, because I just don't want to go up to consultation and confuse the issue of this, life-threatening as opposed to, the lower levels of harm.
Yes, that would make sense. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. So I have councillors Calvert, Free and O'Neill. So Councillor Calvert, you're next.
I'm just curious to know whether any of our buildings, the city council owned ones and social housing, any of those might come under this policy.
None of them do currently, but any building could potentially become dangerous or insanitary.
So I take it that we do I suppose, eat our own dog food? You know, do we actually make sure that we are complying ourselves?
It's a legislative requirement, so yep, broadly speaking, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Free, Deputy Emir Free.
Yeah, thank you. I guess some of my concerns have been mirrored by other councillors, but I would be interested in having advice on what we can do about those more chronic problems with housing, in particular, like, you know, gutters that allow water to just leak onto neighbouring properties, or pipe work that's allowing water to leak not just onto somebody's property but onto neighbouring properties. And if it's not this piece of legislation, which it doesn't seem to be, is there anything more we can do?
Well, I suppose that sort of thing comes under, you know, where we're issuing notices to fix to
Right.
property owners, and a lot of those get issued, you know, on a daily basis. So I would see that would take place through that mechanism rather than through this policy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it might be quite. I'll take this offline because I'd actually be interested to know what we can do in that space.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora, can you hear me? Just testing. Yes. Fantastic. Thank you, Chris and Kate. I had two questions around the clarifications of the definitions and how they've been applied to Wellington in this specific circumstance. When we talk about insanitary buildings or buildings that might put people in, you know, serious risk of life, you spoke a little bit about fires as an example. Did this review take into account disabled persons and different mobility issues as well? I know that in Wellington, we have a bit of a problem with our housing market, that a lot of the homes or properties aren't very accessible to exit in a fire. Have we taken into account those special circumstances? And then I've got one more question.
That is part of the policy's consideration. How that gets applied. You know, if there was a case brought to us and we had to determine whether it was meeting the requirements, I'd have to ask Chris to sort of respond to that. But yes, it's definitely considered as part of this policy.
And did you have another question?
Yeah, and just one other question as well, because I am getting my head around this act. In terms of, did you have an opinion on the breadth of the definitions being implemented? Do you think it's appropriate at local government level? Particularly in Wellington, we do have quite a large issue with damp and mouldy homes. And I know you talked about dangers and special circumstances, but in my experience, students don't have a choice in a lot of these things, and it is really difficult to get the property owner to fix things. And you know, things like in my last flat, but black mold was making people sick, and I would consider that as something that would endanger life. Have you guys found that the definition has been appropriate in terms of assessing the dangers to housing in Wellington?
Yeah, I think the definition in the Building Act around insanitary is helpfully quite broad. So if there was a case that was so significant that, you know, the feeling was it was endangering someone's health, I think it does allow room to do something in that situation. Yeah, so I think it is sort of suitably broad. Yeah, and I think that piece of work to sort of outline some of the jurisdictional challenges, where we can sort of outline, you know, what the Healthy Homes Act regulations will mean in that sort of situation, will be a helpful piece to add into the mix.
Kia ora. So thank you very much. That's all the questions. Oh no, Councillor Pennant, sorry, you did have another question. Sorry.
I didn't want to speak again, but I'm just trying to be helpful. I'm just wondering, Kate, and councillors, would people be happy with an amendment that just asks officers for further advice and saying just about how we can address some of the issues which you've raised, just to keep it clean. In saying that, Kate, I am just looking at the definition. So the dangerous building is quite clear. That really is about life safety. But if you get into insanitary, just to help Fleur, it does say has insufficient or defective provisions against moisture penetration, does not have a supply of potable water, does not have sanitary facilities, is in a state of disrepair. So I guess my question then is, does that mean potentially that quite a few houses in Wellington could be stuck with that definition of being insanitary, just given what we know about New Zealand's housing stock?
Potentially, and I guess you know, we would look at those sort of situations on a case-by-case basis. We haven't applied it in that way much over the last 5 years, is my understanding. But yeah, whether Chris has a sort of a comment on that, I'm not sure. But I think the definition is helpfully broad, and the sort of supporting powers that we've got could look at that situation. Generally, the sort of tenancy services approach and the MB sort of service is probably the best way to go when there are sort of renters in situations where properties are not of a sort of sanitary sort of standard. But yeah, I do think that, you know, the definition of insanitary is perhaps helpfully broad for us.
And just a final question, I presume you prefer the tenancy approach because taking action against owners is quite time consuming in terms of officer time?
Yeah, and I mean, that's a service that is sort of set up for dealing with those particular issues. So it's got the processes in place. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Calvert, it looks like you've got your hand up, is that right? You've got a question? And it looks like Mayor Foster has a question as well.
Yeah. Look, I can understand some of the concerns being expressed by councillors about wanting to extend this, but I'm really worried, you know, in terms of the brief of what we go out to consult. But I would like to understand that if we did look at extending the brief, what does that do for our workload or the workload on officers, given that the forward program already is oversubscribed, and yeah, and I think we've got some really big things around our economy to think about. So I would really like, you know, whether officers could provide some advice about whether they actually have the capacity to expand on this consultation work at this point in time, and the priority of that.
Through you, Chair, is Stephen MacArthur speaking again. I've just made the comment in the through a text to the Chair that depending on that advice when it comes back to you, and I think that's stage one, you know, in terms of what our powers are, what are the gaps perhaps in terms of our enforcement powers to deal with some of the things that you're raising. It could be that, you know, we use the remit process through the local government conference that is coming up, because these things apply to all local authorities in the country. So if there are gaps and on the basis of having looked at the sort of issues you're raising, we and you feel that there is a need for the government perhaps to look at extending those powers, then I think that would be a way to go. I agree. I don't think we should confuse this particular policy at the moment by adding other things in that are truly beyond the legislative powers that are provided to us.
Thank you. Mayor Foster.
Yeah, look, thanks, Iona, for I was going to the definition as well. So, and Stephen, thanks for that as well. So it does feel like while the policy probably says what it says, and Kate, you're telling me earlier that that was as far as we could go. If the definition of what an insanitary building is a bit broader than perhaps we're using, then we could do more. And I guess that's the question that you'll probably want to explore. And now my question of you is what the best way of doing that is. I know that there's a desire maybe to have another paper on this, but I'm also cognizant of what Councillor Calvert said about you know, clogging up the program. You know, what's the right way of dealing with that? Because it would feel like people could make comment on the definition of an insanitary building, or how we put that into practice as part of this process. And then, Stephen, I do like the idea you've asked us for ideas around remits, and I can't remember exactly the time frame that we've given ourselves for that. But we did say we put a paper on the agenda. If there are things which we think are deficient in the legislation which could help us, then we could pick those up then.
Yeah, so I suppose the policy as it stands is really about how we go about applying the definitions in the Building Act itself, and so I'm comfortable that the draft statement of proposal as it stands is aligned with that, and then if operationally needs to be applied more broadly, if more cases are brought to our attention, I think it is fit for purpose to do that.
So would you need anything from us to do that in terms of the level of service that we expect?
Well, it's probably more of a comment for Moana, but my sense is that, you know, over the last 5 years, we've had 14 cases that have needed to go through this policy. Conscious with, you know, with other work going on around the healthy homes standards and what that will mean for sort of rental properties over the next 4 years, you know, a lot of work might happen through that measure. So, you know, my sense is that the policy is fine, you know, is fine in terms of how it's set out in that draft statement of proposal for consultation with the public.
So, a final thing, would it be worth, when we're thinking about the engagement around this, maybe describing some circumstances, scenarios which might fall into or might not fall into definition of dangerous and insanitary? So people get a bit of a feel for what that looks like and what it has looked like, even if you don't specify. You obviously wouldn't want to specify the locations of those, but if there've been situations, either, and it doesn't have to be in Wellington either, where you might say, hey, this looks like it'd be insanitary, this maybe doesn't.
We could put that sort of information on the engagement page, cool. for public to have a look at. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, kia ora, nāne taihua kia te community. We're going to stop now for our 10-minute break because it's pretty much right on 11 o'clock, and then we'll open for the debate for this paper. So 10 minutes. Remember to turn your mic and your camera off just while you're having your break, and come back 10 minutes. Remember, we're still live streaming when we come back. Thank you.
Hi, Joe. Malcolm texted me that he'd gone. Yeah, Malcolm. I know. Malcolm texted me he'd gone to get his feather duster.
That's hilarious. I'm waiting for something. I'm waiting for it to happen to me. I'm going to do something stupid. It's just a matter of time.
I think we're all waiting for it to happen. We don't know who.
It'll probably be me yelling something really embarrassing to my children. Like it'll be awful. I'm so scared.
So how many of us are wearing slippers at the moment?
No. as long as you're not wearing your boxer shorts to go with the feather duster.
Right.
No, too cold.
Just a reminder, all of our audio is being live streamed at the moment.
I know. I shall shut it down.
Yes.
No, you're good. Just as long as you're aware.
People are trying to keep it real. We're nearly all here, I think. Waiting for a few more.
That's a matter of opinion.
Kia ora anō. We're going to get underway because we do have a quorum here, and we've got our person moving the paper here, and so yeah, I'd like to pass over now to Councillor Pennant to introduce the paper.
Very much. Look, when officers said we had to do this policy, I sort of groaned because I said we're in a crisis. Is this the highest priority? Because it is a very narrow scope. But yes, we do have to do it, and so I would like to get on with it. As you have read in the paper, the changes being made are very minor because officers feel that basically it is working. Me being me, I have asked for inclusion about climate change because that also is a source of grave danger to our building stock in the future. And also, I'm happy to take feedback on the wording, but I did just ask that we have a specific thing under policy objectives around consulting with mana whenua, and that's just particularly two areas, one where we have archaeological sites, and also potentially there might be land which is up for contention, you know, for treaty settlement purposes. So just, and they of course, as we heard, will say no if they don't think they've got the time or it's not relevant. So I would though like to thank my colleagues for raising those issues more generally, and I will be supporting the amendment. The policy would have looked very different if we had included the systemic issues around our building. It would have looked completely different. And of course, I know that there are problems with the safety of our and the warmth of our building stock. And of course, that's why many of you worked on and supported the amendment in Te Putoa to do some home energy audits, which will be, you know, a really practical way of trying to address that problem. I would also point out, though, that there are other potentially dangerous buildings, and you know, we still have a lot of earthquake risk. So, for example, we as yet have not touched domestic buildings unless it's 3 stories or more. under the legislation. GNS is doing some work for us on slope stability. Councillor Fitzsimons, I am worried about parts of your ward, you know, where there have been less than safe building practices in the past, we may get another Priscilla Crescent. So, you know, that's very much on top. So I think at the moment, you know, my preference is to keep it, it very tight, because I just think we need to get it through. We've got a lot of work to get on, just given what we're dealing with COVID. But of course, I am always happy to support any amendment that will help us make progress on getting our improving our building stock. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for this paper?
I'm seconding.
Councillor Rush, would you like to speak now?
Very quickly. So my very good friend, Councillor Pennant, and I met with officers and we talked through this in some detail with some rigour. We understand that the policy has been working but does need updating with the modifications in here. I'm very comfortable that it's a working document and the changes will be improved. But as my fellow Councillor Pennant has said, if there are areas that could be improved, then let's hear them.
Thank you. And now open for debate. And I can see Councillor Sparrow would like to speak.
Do you want to put the amendment? Or?
I'll let Councillor Sparrow speak and then we can do the amendment after that.
Just a question in regard to Councillor Pennant's amendment, which reads, note that consultation will be undertaken with mana whenua. My question is that not a given? And if it is, does it need to be specifically stated?
I'll respond to that in right of reply.
I was going to say you. Right of reply, Councillor Pennant can respond to that. So now I'll invite Councillor Fitzsimons to speak and put forward her amendment.
Thank you. I've hopefully Cyrus has got the amendment there and we can just put it up. And apologies for the lateness of this. It really was because we didn't get a chance to get to this on Tuesday. So basically this amendment really is just to make sure that we understand fully our legal powers of enforcement and compliance in relation to improving the safety of housing in Wellington. And it's an issue that I have grappled with for quite some time, and I still can't quite grasp the extent of our powers, how they interact with the government's Healthy Homes guarantee and the legislation they've introduced, and also what our inspection and enforcement powers are in this area. And I've just increasingly realising the importance of moving amendments like this to make sure that things come back to the table and that there's a paper trail of getting things done, because too often I've sort of raised something and then haven't put enough energy or lost focus on it, and I haven't had the outcomes that I was hoping for. So I am trying to formalise this up into an amendment. I don't think it is a particularly large amount of work. It's really just to note what our legal powers of enforcement and compliance are. And I'm hoping that by investigating those, we can respond to the sorts of issues that Renters United raise with us about whether we're really doing everything we can to support tenants, particularly in Wellington. Because just today I had an email from a group of students who are talking about their leaky, drafty flat, which is filled with black mould, and it has been since the day they moved in. They tell me that every tenant's left that flat and that the property manager refused to even contact the landlord to discuss it, and that some windows do not close. And I know that this is one of many, many cases throughout our city. I've been in touch with a woman in Newtown whose child is in and out of hospital with respiratory problems, and the doctors have said that the nature of the housing that they live in has significantly contributed to this child's attendance at hospital and regular visits there. So really, look, this is just about saying the government regulation is a good step, but like all regulation and legislation, it's only as good as the enforcement. And I really want to know that powers that we could be using to improve the quality of housing in Wellington. I really want officers to just look at the statute and answer those questions. And look, I know this isn't the end of the issue, but during the election campaign, Renters United asked us a whole bunch of questions about our commitment to improving the quality of rental housing in Wellington. And I hope that this paper will start us on a journey of using every enforcement and compliance power that we have. And I think just one of the other things I would add is that it may well be that through this paper, and once we understand the particular powers we have, that we take more action in addressing the massive power imbalance between landlords and tenants. And I'm particularly thinking of work that we could do through the Grants Committee in supporting some independent tenant advocacy services in a more proactive and increased way. So I'm hoping that this will be the start of kind of a journey that we can go on to require landlords in Wellington to provide decent, safe and healthy accommodation. And I welcome your support, and Councillor Paul will second it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Paul. Would you like to speak now?
Yes, please. I'll just speak very briefly to the paper as well. So I just wanted to thank Councillor Pannett for bringing the paper forward and the officers who have worked on it. Thank you, Councillor Pannett, for putting the mana whenua clause in there. I think it's really important, and like Ngāti Tuarangatira said to us the other day, you know, all they would like is if we just go to them and they will tell us if they don't want to co-design or work on that with us. So thank you for bringing that forward, and I hope it is a given, like Councillor Sparrow says. Yeah, no surprises that Councillor Fitzsimons and I are bringing this amendment forward as two previous Vic Uni Student Association presidents, but you know, we've worked on many different rental campaigns, but I think it's not just students, it's also whānau, it's disabled people, and they're all finding themselves in these homes that none of us would allow ourselves to live in, none of us would want our family living in either. So I think the condition of our housing, condition of our rentals is intimately linked to our economy. If you just need to look at Vic Deals or Wellington Flatmates pages, and you can see that they're absolutely full right now of rental ads, because obviously everyone has fled and gone home to their warm, dry homesteads across the country rather than staying in Wellington in their poor, damp and mouldy flats. And so I think it's critical that we get as much people back here spending their money. We know that students contribute $600 million to our annual economy, and that's not even including whānau and disabled people that also live in these rental accommodation. You know, we have a part to play in ensuring these healthy home standards are adhered to. Like Councillor Fitzsimons says, there is a power imbalance, and many people in these and poor rentals will not go to the tenancy tribunal out of fear of losing their home. I think this amendment is great. I think it's a good prioritisation of officers' time, and I highly recommend that people look into Generation Rent by Shamabeel Jacob. This talks about the fact that my generation and many others will be lifelong renters due to the state of our housing market. So I think we do everything that we can to make sure that that rental stock is up to standard and isn't making people sick. So thank you, and look forward to hearing more debate.
Kia ora, I'm going to speak now, and then I've got a few other people on the list as well. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Councillor Fitzsimons for this amendment and for looking for ways that we can help people improve the quality of housing. It's very easy to see all the gaps and not know how to fill them, and I think it's really great to be looking at opportunities and avenues that we can use to enforce and to improve this for real people. Actually, the housing quality issue is the reason that I did actually agree to stand for council. I was teaching a child who was off school for months on end with terrible respiratory illnesses and black mold, and actually like full-on leaks in the ceiling of his bedroom. And this is just far too common, and I think what we need to acknowledge is that at the moment our systems aren't working. We need to look for every possible way that we can to make these changes. I mean, actually, even last triennium we had a new staff member come to council who moved to Wellington and was looking for a property in the central city, and was absolutely shocked at the quality of our apartments and the fact that they were really expensive, but they were really mouldy. So I'm really grateful for looking for this opportunity, and I would also like to acknowledge and thank Councillor Pannett for the mana whenua amendment in there. I think it is really important that yes, we acknowledge that there are many sites where buildings are where mana whenua were before, and so there are huge impacts if a building is being looked at in this way, and we need to make sure that we're always open and having that conversation early, and so I really do appreciate that being highlighted. And next on the list was Councillor Pannett.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzsimons. Can I just ask a question of the meaning of the amendment? You're talking about the safety of our housing, it seems that you were most interested in, you know, the warmth aspect, but safety, oh, right. So yeah, all I was just wanting to be clear on, is that also safety around earthquakes, climate change, and also making sure we also just don't get leaky problems as well, because that's a broader piece of work, and I just think we need to be really clear with the officers. Kia ora.
Yeah, it's all safety that we have jurisdiction to enforce or compliance.
Thank you, Councillor Condé.
Kia ora. Just quickly, I wanted to acknowledge Councillor Panich and agree that for this piece of work, it's really important that we keep the focus on the policy and the legislative powers that we have in this area. So I really support that, but I am going to be supporting Councillor Fitzsimon's amendment as well, because I think, you know, it's really important that we understand our enforcement powers. There's no point in having these rules if we can't enforce them. So I think it's a really important function of council, and I think this is a great time to be getting this advice because it's leading us into the long-term plan discussion. So understanding what these enforcement powers are and whether we want to ramp up our enforcement and our investment in that enforcement is something I'd really like to understand leading into that long-term plan conversation. So I'm going to be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Free. Sorry, Deputy Mayor Free.
Yeah, thank you. Look, this is an area I've actually been passionate about for a long time, and the discussions about building warranted fitness is something we had way back at the Sustainability Trust. As to, you know, I was working with a Dutch colleague at the time. She said they have a warranted fitness in Holland. You're not meant to be able to rent out a living situation that's not actually fit for purpose, and fit for purpose means it keeps you safe and warm and dry. I'm really, really keen to see us look at what we can do to enforce buildings that are not that the plumbing basically isn't up to scratch. You know, really basic things like gutters that leak over the surface of the house, let water in through the windows, make it damp underneath the house, make it really, really unhealthy. And they're actually quite simple to fix. It's just that landlords are not particularly motivated to fix them. Why should they be? And that's what we need to address. That's what regulation is all about, fixing the gaps where, for one reason or another, the public good is not being enforced by private interests. And I think this is very much the case with some of the very simple things that go wrong with houses that not only impact on that house, but actually impact on neighbours' houses as well. So things like dripping taps, constantly dripping, broken pipes, broken gutters, windows that don't close properly, they are just quite often quite simple to fix. I'd really like to see us explore this. We're obviously put more money into the home energy checks. I'd like to see us make sure that moisture is a real focus of that. And I'd actually think we should give some thought to whether we could have a council plumber that people can access at a very reasonable rate, and that they'll get trusted advice about what can be done to fix houses. Because as I say, sometimes it's a couple of $100 to stop actually thousands of dollars of damage down the track. If we do this, I'd like to suggest also that we involve the Pacific Advisory Group as well as Mana Whenua. They have a high proportion of their people rent, and they know a lot about what's wrong with their houses, and are not always enabled to actually remedy or advocate for remedies. I think they'd be very interested in this piece of work. So I'm definitely supporting it, the amendments, and I thank my colleagues for bringing it to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Rush.
Thank you. First of all, absolutely wonderful intention, but I do wonder, I mean, this is the sort of thing we could have asked officers to do outside of a council meeting, but nevertheless, it's relevant to the to the paper, and I'll be supporting it. I too was a Vic University student, lived in the Aro Valley, 1988, 8 of us in a 4-bedroom, damp, dark, mouldy. Landlord was he was pretty unresponsive, but it was the best year of my life, frankly. It was great. I also took landlord to the tenancy tribunal and was successful, but that's just me. Now, just talking about power imbalance, I think we need to be more transformational than what Councillor Fitzsimons perhaps said. In my view, there is a lot of very good family housing stock tied up in Kelburn by students, and what they need is a modern, customised accommodation block that's close, or it can be easily linked to the university in its various parts of the city, which would free up the housing stock for families, and that would address the power imbalance that landlords have. You destroy or you upset the market that they play in, and that would do wonderful things to also provide housing stock for the likes of Councillor Paul. So that's my vision, but we can talk about that another day. Well done, Councillor Fitzsimons.
Thank you, Councillor Young.
Okay, thank you. So I'm a little bit distracted because I've moved from one location to the other side of Wellington in the coffee break. So I just want to check something, because I'm concerned that we are turning a molehill into a mountain here. And, you know, we're consulting with, we want to consult with Maru, we want to consult with Pacifica. I mean, it's just like, these are technical issues. Either a pipe leaks or it doesn't leak. And I don't see any reason why we have to get involved with ethnic communities. I mean, I think we should be looking after all Wellingtonians. I mean, it's not a matter of, I just can't see the value of bringing in Pacifica or Scots or whatever. We want plumbers. We want people who actually understand why buildings are leaking and checking that kind of thing. So I feel it's really well intentioned, but this is a technical issue. It's not really a cultural issue. A building either leaks and is mold or it doesn't. But I just also want to check that whether I understood this, that am I correct in thinking that the purpose of one of these amendments is that we consult with mana whenua about any buildings built before 1900, is that right?
I think Councillor Pennant can probably respond to that in her right of reply.
Because I'd just like to know, could we know the identity of some of these buildings?
Councillor Pennant can respond to that in her right of reply. Maybe you can send her a message.
Maybe she's listening.
What's that, sorry?
Maybe she's listening.
She is.
Good.
But the process is the right of reply.
Well, yeah, but she needs to know the question. And the thing is, what happens if the answer is there aren't any that were built before 1900?
She can respond to that in the right of reply.
Sorry, so this is about archaeological sites, Councillor Young in particular.
But we have that already.
Thank you. We'll move on now to Mayor Foster, who I think actually does have a question that will need to be directed to staff, and it's a reasonable question around timing and capacity, and yeah, I'd like to allow that now.
Yeah, I'm trying. Can you put the amendment back up again, please, Jill? Or sorry, Sarah, somebody. So it's a question of what the scope of the amendment is, because I thought it was one thing, and it seems from people's comments that it's becoming something. I think what did Councillor Young say? A mountain rather than the molehill.
I don't think she was talking about the amendment, to be fair.
I'm not quite sure what she was talking about. I'm not quite sure what people do. So I guess my question is probably first of all of the mover is what is the scale, the breadth of the area which you're expecting to go to, and then my question to officers will be how much work, whatever that breadth is going to be, does this involve? Because originally it seemed like it was relatively small and confined. From the comments that people are making, it's now got slightly bigger than Ben-Hur.
Sure, I'm very happy to answer that. I mean, the first part is, in terms of bigger than Ben-Hur, I think that some of the comments have been made about the substantive resolutions rather than this quite contained amendment. So basically what I want officers to do is to look at where the powers lie and what powers council has, look at the legislation, outline what the powers are, demonstrate to us what the power council has to address unsafe, cold and damp housing, and look, it may be quite limited. I know we do a bit of work with MB, but in the past I've tried to get this information and it's been quite difficult to kind of actually pin down exactly what it is. And while I'm a lawyer, I'm certainly not an expert in tenancy in this sort of area. So I really want to understand what the kind of enforcement compliance powers are and the kind of overall policy framework that we're operating in here. So I think it'll be contained by the nature of the powers. So I suspect if what Moana said is that they're quite limited, then it may be quite limited, and in which case we might have to take Stephen MacArthur up on his point around gaps in the legislative framework. But really I just want to understand what power we do have and whether we're using it to its full extent.
I will just get Moana just to speak to, obviously it says to an upcoming Strategy and Policy Committee meeting. So just the timing around that. Moana, would you like to?
The timing and the scale of the work as they're understanding what they're being asked to do, and yes, how that fits into their ability to deliver it, is I guess my question.
Yes, so in terms of where this conversation has gone, it's become quite a large piece of work potentially. And it would be good to get a little bit more clarity in terms of all the comments that many of you have made about dripping taps and gutters and stuff like that. If this is just about the kind of healthy home stuff, then it would be good to get clarity on that. I think the dangerous and insanitary building side, I didn't know if you wanted that brought into it as well. That's basically what this paper is. That's a very high threshold. It's not, so we can kind of give you a legislative rundown of what our powers are. Obviously, how we apply them is not always black and white, and we have to, there's a level of risk involved that we have to consider. So it's not always just as simple as saying, this is our exact power, and in every situation, this is how we're going to apply it. So I guess, Fleur, to your comment, that's probably why you haven't had a really black and white answer on it, is that on a case-by-case basis, we have to make a call about whether we're applying our powers in an appropriate way, whether we're prepared to push the boundaries a little bit because of the risk, or whether, again, in terms of risk, and I think the example that Chris gave around a building not being occupied, we might not. So it's not black and white, but as I said, we can provide that. I can't answer the question about capacity at the moment because I haven't really got my head fully around exactly the scope of what we're being asked to do. Happy, as I said, happy to bring something back. Stephen had a bit of a, Stephen and I have been texting, and I'll just ask him to comment on. He had a bit of a suggestion as well.
Thanks, Moana. I was thinking about the advice that comes back. It might be that we can use some of our external legal partners to help us with this piece of work, because it's not just necessarily the strict legislative words that you're going to read. It's probably case law as well, because this will have influenced how these things are interpreted. It's also a case of balancing private property rights with public interest, and there is a test in there. So we would want to make sure that the advice we bring back is fulsome and logical, and also probably pointing out where the limitations are for councils, and probably, to my earlier point, if there are gaps that need to be filled, then what options are available. Because as I said earlier, this is a question for all of local government, not just us, and it would be useful to see what other local authorities have done, just to make sure that we are, where we sit, and whether or not we are exercising all of our powers. So I can't give you an exact answer at the moment. I think perhaps let us go away and think about when would be, once we've scoped that out, when we could bring it back. And we're happy to talk with the relevant portfolio holder. And one of the other thoughts I actually had was, given the sort of thing that you've actually asked for, it's perhaps more appropriate to take it back to the Regulatory Process Committee, because you're actually asking, what our existing powers are. But look, probably a workshop ahead of bringing a paper back might also help too.
And sorry, just to finish that off then, Stephen and Moana, do you have any concerns then about the amendment, or is it possibly more the scope of what people are saying about the substantive and expanding the substantive into other areas, which is more the healthy homes as opposed to dangerous and sanitary?
On the face of it, it is quite wide, but I think we have taken from the discussion what the priority areas are that councillors are interested in. And I think if we just apply some common sense and probably talk with a number of the portfolio holders ahead of, just basically, landing that, I think we'll be okay.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Thank you. So I've got two more speakers for the amendment. I've got Councillors O'Neill and Calvert. So Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, just briefly to echo some of the points that have been raised in front of us as well. I fully agree with Councillor Fitzsimons and Councillor Paul around using every tool that we might have in the toolbox in order to investigate some of the things that we can do. So studies have shown that, I was looking at an Otago University study the other day that showed that insulated homes reduced in significant amount of hospitalizations and mortality rates and renters that occupied them. And I think like the impact of that statement in a place like Otago and a place like Wellington is quite significant when you consider the harm to the economy, to people being able to sustain jobs and people's overall health as well. And of course, many of us will be renting into a retirement. I, for one, don't count home ownership as something that's feasible in the future. So the best thing that we can do is understand if we can be one of those, you know, powers that be, to help others to make sure that living is safe and secure into the future as well. And you know, I appreciate the stories shared today, and how sometimes we get lucky. I've got a really good landlord, but in the future, you know, this is going to be essentially a whole generation that's going to be renting into their late 70s and 80s, and I'd like to be able to ensure that we can make the most of all the changes that we can in 2020. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert.
I'm still listening to the debate, but I suppose I do have concerns about whether this particular amendment from Councillor Fitzsimmons could be become broader than maybe what is initially stated. And I have a lot of sympathy for it. I'm just really concerned about the work on our offices right at the moment. We are in the you know, in a 100-year event with COVID-19, and there's a lot of things on. And whilst we might get some information, where's that going to lead? And where does that fit into our organization's priorities right here and now? And also, are we stepping into what is essentially government's role as well? Because it's the government sets the legislation. It's the government that needs to fund enforcement of that legislation as well. So look, I'll keep listening, but and maybe Councillor Fitzsimmons could give me some assurance that it is a very, very limited piece of work. But yeah, as I said, I'm really I think we've got some other things that we really need to focus on right here and now. So that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzsimmons. You're right to reply.
Yeah, look, just briefly, just thanks for the comments, and I think they're really helpful. I think Councillor Rush is responsible for discrimination against law students and their ability to gain housing, given his approach. And I think very many landlords will look twice at law students when they come to try and rent their properties, and we might be able to blame Councillor Rush for that. But I think in terms of the amendment, I think the reason I bought something like this, and I think it's sort of something that I'm increasingly understanding as a councillor, is that there's a power imbalance in the council as well. There's the huge amount of resource that council officers have, the number of people, the expertise they can get, the external consultants they can engage, and then there's councillors. And the community say to me, the council's not doing enough to enforce the quality of houses. And I go and say to council officers, oh, do you think we could do this? Do you think we could do this? Do you think we could do this? Actually, the way that we can really require some work to be done so that we understand what is possible is through an amendment around that table and around this table. And I guess that's why I brought this resolution, is to say, just bring it to a head, tell us what's possible. And look, we've heard on the one hand that our powers are very limited, but on the other hand that this could be a really large piece of work. So if our powers are very limited, this won't be a very large piece of work because our powers are very limited and there won't be much to say. But if there is more scope, once we take another look at the legislation and once we take another look at our responsibilities, and particularly around our regulatory powers, maybe we'll find a way that we can play a useful role alongside government in requiring increased quality housing in Wellington. And I just want to really acknowledge what Councillor O'Neill said. The quality of housing is a life and death issue for vulnerable people. It genuinely is. It's really, really important. So I think, this is really just saying, are we doing everything we can? And look, Councillor Calvert, I appreciate your comments. And I think the way to understand the extent of the role of central government and local government is to understand the legal responsibilities and powers that we have. And then we can understand that further. And it may well be that we determine we do have more powers than we're using, but we decide not to continue down that path because it should be the central government. And then we go to central government or through Local Government New Zealand and try and change their approach. But I guess I guess what I would say is let's find out, let's make sure that we're doing everything we can to improve the quality of rental housing in Wellington. And I think this paper will help us really understand what powers the council has and what we can do. And in terms of priority, one of the priorities of this council is housing in Wellington. So in terms of how it fits with our priorities, I think it's quite a nice fit.
Oh, kia ora. So thank you for that. Now that we've had this amendment put and seconded, and now we've had the right of reply, we will go to vote. So please vote accordingly.
We just have it all up on screen so we can see exactly what we're voting for, please.
Sure,
Jill,
thank you.
Jill, can we have some more clarification about Iona's amendment as well, the one about mana whenua?
So we will move back to that in a minute. We're just dealing with this amendment at the moment.
Okay. I realised that. Thank you.
And I think Iona will be able to share that it's supported by officers. So it's
voting on Councillors Calvert, and that's unanimous.
Thank you very much. So now we will move back to the substantive motion. Is there any further debate to the substantive motion, or are people ready to move to Councillor Pannett's right of reply? I think we are. Councillor Pannett, your right of reply.
Thank you. And I do love this place so much. I started off with a very technical policy and we had a large debate about housing quality, so that's lovely. Hey, look, apologies. I wrote this amendment very late last night and I probably should have just been just a teeny bit clearer. So what it really should have said was, and it does have officer support, but this was about deciding on the future of dangerous and sanitary buildings when they are up for demolition. So if people are okay, if I could just add those words in because this is going up for public consultation. The reason this is important is that while there might, very sadly, trust me, I have deep grief, the fact that we don't necessarily have structures pre-1900 from mana whenua is terrible. But what we do have is archaeological sites, and they are very important, and council has a role in helping to protect them, and so we should. And you know, councillors, of course, I'm passionate about European heritage, but also about the history and culture of all people, and particularly our treaty partners. So this was just about saying, hey, can we please consult when there might be that implication that a building might be coming down, and we do then need to take that opportunity to look at the archaeological status. Unfortunately, of course, being an earthquake-prone city, we do, you know, the risk of demolishing buildings is quite high, and also that it may be absolutely appropriate, given we've still got some rights to buy back. So that's all I meant. And in saying that though too, I strongly support the comments. I think it was Councillor Free who said, look, we do need to consult with people who are impacted by insanitary building, and mana whenua would be part of that. But I guess just this one really is about just making sure that we are protecting heritage.
Thank you very much. So now that we have the substantive, which we can see there.
So are people okay for me to change that?
Yes.
That's
do you
right.
just want to make sure, do you want to state what the wording is there? You can see it here, just so that people know what you're voting on.
What are you changing it to? Just to be clear.
He's about to say, note that.
When deciding on the future of a dangerous, when deciding on the future of dangerous or insanitary building, if being considered for to be demolished.
Yeah.
Anyway, someone can tidy that up. The officers, I'm sure, can write better than I can. But that's just
good though. That is important. Thank you. Right. So now that we've had
can you put it up there? Can you put it up there, Jill, so we can see it?
It is.
I can see it.
We've got the screen shared at the moment. So yeah, maybe that you've minimized it, have you?
No, it's there.
You can see it?
Yeah. Is that finished as it is?
Do you need to take out as appropriate?
Take out as appropriate.
Oh,
yeah.
The reason I put as appropriate is just that maybe they might not want to be consulted or whatever, but I
think that's given.
If you want to take it, okay, take out as appropriate, that's fine.
So now that we've had the right
That's not
so,
good.
sorry, Jill, just to ask, I thought there was something there about heritage or archaeological.
No, that's just part of the debate. That's not part of the amendment.
So the amendment's about any dangerous or insanitary building.
Yes, but because, as Councillor Pennant says, we don't actually have any mana whenua buildings from pre-1900s, this is really about archaeological sites. So
it doesn't say that.
But,
what do you
but
want
we
me
know
to
that.
Yes, I think it'll be helpful because otherwise what you're saying is that you will be consulting with mana whenua on any dangerous or insanitary building being considered to be demolished. That
but
would
you
be
should.
batty.
Because there could be an archaeological site under it, and that will be established very quickly. It's very simple,
Well,
and I don't want to get into a debate about it now because we've actually had our right of reply.
Site, that might be interesting.
It's time to stop the debate now. We've had our right of reply. The process is that we now put this this full substantive to the vote. So so I now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. So we have the original substantive plus the amendments that we've had, and people, you can now vote accordingly.
Just waiting on Memphis. That is unanimous.
Thank you very much, councillors. Fantastic. Really good work there. So now we're going to move on to item 2.1, which is the public hire electric scooter evaluation. And I would like to invite Deputy Mayor Free to introduce the report.
Thank you, everybody. Well, it is my pleasure actually to have got to this point with the scooter trial. Way back in June of last year, we voted to go with a 6-month trial.
Hey, Chris, it's Moana again.
Moana, we can hear you.
Asking us.
Yes, thanks for that.
I've sorted that. Thanks.
Oh, good. Look, I wasn't actually in favour of the trial. It was a bit of a line call for me, but I was very nervous at the time about the sudden influx of 800 scooters on our streets and what that would mean, and about the impact on our footpath space and our vulnerable pedestrians and other footpath users. Of course, that had to be balanced up with the fact that these things are perfectly legal and people could have them anyway if they wanted to purchase them. But I did think at the time that 800 all at once arriving overnight was going to be quite a change to our footpaths and our streets. As it turned out, I think some of my fears were unfounded. Auckland had at the time quite a bad run with their Lime scooters. There was a fault in the technology which meant they braked very suddenly, and there were reports of really quite serious injuries, and I'm not sure, but at least overseas there were some deaths as well. So, you know, we didn't quite know what we were heading into. But as it's turned out, I think it has gone reasonably well. So we have had surveys done which have shown amongst our panel, which is a representative panel. So that means it's got different types of people on the panel, vaguely representative of the proportions in Wellington society. And it's usually about 600 or 700 people that respond. So it's a statistically quite valid survey. Of that panel, in fact, there's been about a 60% support for people who are saying that they would absolutely or probably like to keep the scooters. Of course, it's highest amongst young people. We've had 82% support from them. But even amongst the older age group, the 65 to 74-year-olds who were least enthusiastic, even then 53% actually said that they thought the scooters were either definitely worth continuing with or maybe worth continuing with. And only 34% of those people who actually thought they definitely didn't want to continue with the trial. Now, I know this won't be universal, nothing ever is, but I think there is evidence that there is good support there. Also, the interesting thing is that people have been using these consistently over the year. So the usage just remains quite steady over summer and winter. So there are people who are consistently using these scooters. They're particularly using them at peak hours, so 8 o'clock and 5 in the morning and 5 to 6 in the afternoon is the highest usage, which does indicate that they are being used for commuting. And that would probably indicate that, in fact, they're displacing car use and they're also helping with our public transport capacity. So I think there's good evidence there that for it to give us comfort about continuing with the scooter operation. The call centre complaints, 155 calls from 110 people. It's not huge numbers of complaints. And of those, actually 5 individuals made quite a proportion of the complaints, and they clearly didn't like the scooters or thought that they weren't being operated in a way that was satisfactory. The main issues were the placement of the scooters, the way they fell all over the footpath, and that would be my main observation about the problems with them too. We've had a lot of discussion about how we can manage that better. That definitely is something I think we need to be aware of and to do something about. Other complaints were just that they felt that people weren't using them appropriately, or that they actually just didn't like scooters on footpaths. So we're looking at all of that, but I think on balance, and it does have to be a matter of balance, I think on balance there is quite a lot of evidence to say we should probably continue with some kind of trial. Micromobility is definitely here to stay. I don't think we can get around that. You know, it's here to stay, and it's only going to get, you know, more prevalent. All the things that are, all the wheels and all the things that are electrified are here to stay. They're a valuable part of our city. What our challenge is as a road controlling authority is how do we actually manage that? How do we support it? How do we regulate around it? And what other provisions do we put in place to make sure it works? The accidents, there's evidence around that. We didn't get the huge increase of accidents that Auckland did and Christchurch did. We did get an increase in accidents. That was largely related, I think, to the fact that a lot of people were suddenly using scooters who never had used them previously. I would hope that over time that accident rate settles down as people get more adjusted to how to use them safely, and as we provide better conditions as well. I know there are going to be a lot of amendments coming. I've put up one which is just about the desirability of making sure, if possible, that we keep employing local if we're going out to contract again. But I know there are a lot of amendments coming from colleagues, most of which I'm probably going to be quite prepared to support. We'll see how that works out as we have our move through our debate. So look, I'm happy to bring you these recommendations, a slight amendment to recommendation 6. And I'm delighted to say that my ward councillor, Terry O'Neill, has offered to second. And Terry and I have had the pleasure of seeing a lot of provision put in for biking and scootering in our ward. And we've seen how people are actually loving this and really using it more and more. So I'm very pleased that Terry's offered to second this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Free. Councillor O'Neill, would you like to speak now?
I'll reserve my right to speak. Thank you, Sarah.
So I have a speaking order so far. I have Councillor Sparrow would like to speak.
Can we have the other screen back, please? Yeah, just a matter of clarification, directing this to Deputy Mayor Free, the Amendment 6, with consideration given to using local or New Zealand-owned companies, and there was a wee bit of discussion online about this, should the word not be preference, because consideration will automatically be given, surely? Do you mean preference, Deputy Mayor?
I was going to put favourable consideration, and in fact officers were happy with that. So if the mood of the meeting is to put favourable consideration in, then we can put that word back. I mean, I thought consideration sort of implies that you would be looking positively towards it, but if people are comfortable with favourable consideration, the advice I had from officers were they were happy enough with that.
So maybe I'm not seeing anyone violently shaking their heads, so we're going to go with that being okay. It's a little bit harder to get the will of the meeting through lots of screens, but I can see no one's looking upset by that.
Yeah.
So far on the speaking order, I have Councillor Condi, and I can see Councillor Wolf has his hand up as well. So we'll work our way through this. Councillor Condi.
Thank you. I thought I'll move my amendment early in the debate so we can get onto that conversation. So Cyrus, if you wouldn't mind putting that up for me. Thank you so much. So just to speak to this, I think we had some great public participation today talking about how young people have been able to participate more in our city and use our public spaces because of these e-scooters. And the other thing that we saw in the research is that actually disabled people and people with mobility issues found that the scooters were really helpful in allowing them to get around our city as well. The downside is that it's meant some of our older people feel less confident participating in our public spaces on our footpaths. And that's really the balance that we're trying to strike today. There's no doubt that there are benefits to having these scooters in our city, but can we find ways to actually give our older people more confidence in using our public spaces and footpaths? And that's essentially what these amendments are trying to do. So 3A is adding an additional bullet point saying that we will add to the code of practice, which is proposing to utilizing geofencing technology to enforce a 15k speed limit along the waterfront and Oriental Parade. So this is an enforceable speed limit similar to what they talked about that exists on hospital grounds. So the GPS technology would set up a zone, and then when the scooter enters that zone, the scooter would automatically be limited to a maximum speed of 15 kilometers along the waterfront and Oriental Parade. And I've given the officers some leeway there in the brackets to allow them to look at what's safe and practical along all of those situations, because there are limits to the technology at the moment. It's not as accurate as we might like. So they've got a bit of freedom to make decisions about how exactly that gets implemented. We're also looking at Oriental Parade in particular to make sure that there's the clutter along there is being dealt with. This is an area of the city that actually hasn't had as much of a problem with clutter as other parts of the city, but it is a really popular walking spot. And we want to make sure that particularly older residents who live in that area can still use their spaces. So looking at some parking solutions for along there. Finally, the amendment number 10 there is looking at ways to get scooters off the footpaths. Everybody agrees that people who like scooters think they should be around, and many councillors agree that they're here to stay, but we don't want them on our footpaths if we can help it. That's not where they belong. So this is just about giving a clear bit of direction to officers that we really want to go as quickly as we can with the cycleways. In this case, we've called it micro mobility infrastructure network, since it's now no longer just cycleways, but also for e-scooters and other kinds of micro mobility devices. So it's about making sure that we're providing that infrastructure so that scooters can get off the footpaths where it's safe to do so, and as well looking at a program of safer speeds around the city, because when cars are going 30k on the streets, then it makes it safer for the scooters to mix with that traffic. So these amendments are all about just trying to make it safer and give our older pedestrians and disabled pedestrians a bit more confidence in using our streets. Obviously it's a bit of a long-term journey, but there are a few things that we can do right now that will make that difference. And also just to say that more broadly, I really support the substantive and the trial continuing. We know in the area of COVID that providing these options to people means if it turns out that our buses, which aren't at capacity at the moment, are full, you might be able to get on a scooter and scoot into the city instead of having to rely on the bus. And we also know that young people have been using these scooters to make trips to retail and hospo destinations that they wouldn't have otherwise made. So it is going to be providing a benefit to some of our most struggling businesses to make sure that these scooters stay on the streets. So I look forward to a good debate about these amendments, and I'll thank Councillor Young for agreeing to second them.
Thank you. Councillor Young, would you like to speak now?
Yeah, I'll speak now, and I'll speak, and therefore almost ever hold my peace.
Thank you.
So first of all, I'd just like to say I do support the trial continuing. I think we need to have a really good idea of its effect on the city and on Wellingtonians. But I have to say I am conflicted about e-scooters. I completely accept they are here to stay, and I understand their advantages. I've had lots of people telling me how much they love them. I also know that I am not planning to use one for the sake of ACC. But as a Lambton councillor and a resident, I understand their effect that they're having on pedestrians too. And pedestrians are, of course, top of our transport hierarchy. And Lambton residents and indeed workers in Lambton probably do the most walking of anyone in the city, because it is, I think it was pointed out in the stats before about we are the highest users of e-scooters and walking because it's a very compact city. But it's very important that pedestrians who often include our most vulnerable feel safe. And so who are our most vulnerable? Well, they're young children, not quite such a big issue in the inner city, but still an issue, older people and people with disabilities. And I think they deserve to have a sense of tranquility when they're on our footpaths. They need to feel safe. And that's one of the reasons that I would now support the lower speed limits in the central city, because it's a way of getting mechanized devices off our pavements so that people can walk there with safety. So I mean, I would love to ban e-scooters from our footpaths, but you know, I realize that we also need our car parks because they are a major source of revenue. They're also very important to a lot of businesses and to people who want to shop, pop in and get their whatever from David Jones, and we need them to do that. So let's not discourage that. I am intrigued that the paper cites Paris as an example. I looked up Paris to see what the latest rules on e-scooters are in Paris. And I was interested to see they are banned from footpaths, but they have hundreds of dedicated cycle parks. So, you know, that is something we really, that is important. And they must use cycleways where they are available. So I think when we're citing other cities, we must make sure that they're absolutely in line with what we're saying over here. Otherwise, we have the danger of looking, dare I say it, stupid. I think it's interesting looking at the stats that the e-scooters are used primarily for short distances, which actually can probably just as easily be walked. So I'm not entirely sure that they, I mean, I get it, they're micro-mobility, but I think for a lot of people they're fun and they may be better to use, what's the term, Shank's pony? Our feet, but that's just an aside. The thing is, I am a pragmatist. You know, I'm not a philosophical purist. I love the idea also of a 10-kilometer speed limit. I think that's great. Of course, I'm seconding an amendment which talks about 15. I haven't got it in front of me. But the trouble with 10 is it's a great idea, but I do have a tenuous grasp of physics. And I know I have been told they become unstable at that speed. And the last thing we want are people on e-scooters falling off and crashing because they've got the wobbles. So yeah, I will go with 15 kilometers an hour, but I will do all I can while I'm a councillor. And afterwards, when I'm not a councillor in 25 years' time, I'll spend my time writing letters to the editor. So anyway, I'm very happy to second this paper. Thank you.
Right, so what I'm just going to do is clarify who's speaking to what, because of course we now have hands up for the substantive, but also for the amendment. So just so that no one gets left out, I have to speak to the amendment that's just been put forward. Councillors Matthews, Wolf, Sparrow and Rush to speak to the amendment. And then on the substantive, I have Councillors Wolf and Paul. So just be really mindful if you speak to the amendment and you want to speak to the substantive, make sure you don't speak to the substantive, otherwise you're going to cause yourself some issues. So we'll start with Councillor Matthews.
Kia ora koutou. I would like to, I have to say, like Councillor Young and unlike Margaret Atwood, I'm not adventurous enough to get on an e-scooter either, but I did see when Margaret Atwood posted the video that went viral and millions of people liked it, so good for her. I'd just like to thank Councillor Condi and other councillors for moving amendments, these interventions to improve the safety and the quality of our e-scooter hire. I think it's important that we take the safety concerns that people are presenting to us seriously. And they're not just perceptions, they are real. And while I recognise that the benefits are real, we also need to continue to make changes and adjustments that address these safety concerns. And I'm particularly interested and concerned by it's Global Accessibility Day today. So those views that are coming to me from disabled people, and I know there's a variety of views out there about, you know, some disabled people really want to use scooters and find them great and they help them get around. Other people, you know, absolutely hate them. But to take those, you know, the missed journeys, those are the things that I'm really concerned about, where people are staying home or not going around and using the city as much as they could because they do have a legitimate fear. And I asked our accessibility advisory group for some of their thoughts, and I got a great email from Stu about how they, he and his wife, who uses a wheelchair, were able to enjoy, they live in an apartment in the city, how they were able to enjoy Oriental Bay and the waterfront much more under levels 3 and 4 of COVID, because they weren't, you know, they didn't have these concerns about those devices kind of wasn't past them. And he also mentioned that you know, being able to get around on her own is something that his wife wouldn't do because of her concerns about safety. And I guess also to note, and this is a really important point that Stu made, is that disabled people whatever their disability, are significantly impacted by e-scooters. So we're not just talking about people with mobility issues, but sight and hearing and neurodiversity. There's a lot of people who are affected in different ways by these, and we do need to take that into account. So I just want to say thanks again for these amendments, and that, you know, in our decision making in this, that council, we need to proceed as we hope that e-scooters would, e-scooter riders would, with caution, care and consideration about the decisions, and keep making these improvements, listening to people and making the adjustments to make the scheme better and fairer.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wolf.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. As most people are aware, I didn't vote for the trial in the first place because I felt that it was still unsafe. That's borne to bear to a degree. And in the last few days, I've managed to obtain statistics from Wellington Hospital. So at least 71 presentations were through ED during a period of time. That doesn't include overnight admissions. It does not include doctors' first visits. It does not include where paramedics were in attendance. So I just thought, bringing that into context, also that there were 12 orthopedic interventions in relation to e-scooters. One thing that was really, really interesting, Dr. Paul Quigley told me that when he analysed the results, most of the accidents and incidents didn't relate to scooter drivers. Most of them related to scooters being left and being a tripping hazard, and I found that absolutely something that surprised me and didn't in some ways. So when we're considering what we're going to do, and particularly with speed, I think that those presentations that have been made come into effect, and they should influence us. As you know, through the public participation, we had Carl, and I asked him a specific question about the speed at Wellington Hospital on the footpaths that reduced to 10 kilometres through geofencing, and I asked him if that was reasonable, and he said yes. And for that reason, I believe that our waterfront and particularly Oriental Bay would be safe for users at 10 kilometres per hour. You know, like I really believe that, you know, we've given an indication in the past that 10 kilometres per hour is the speed that we find acceptable on our footpaths for other modes other than walking. And I think that 10 kilometre per hour is something that we should monitor under a trial. It's there for us now. I understand what Councillor Young stated earlier about the speed wobbles, and I respect that there is a school of thought to that. But Carl didn't say that it was unreasonable or that there were speed wobbles. He said it was reasonable. And I think 10 kilometres per hour, and for my first walk down Oriental Bay in 6 months, I believe that the silence of the e-scooters also mean that people, and especially our elderly, can't hear them coming. And I think that 10 kilometres per hour would be more reasonable. And I'm hoping that there'll be an amendment coming to change the 15 kilometres that's been suggested down to 10. So yeah, I would just, you know, we are in a trial, and you know there are all sorts of things that are going on. And as I said previously, I didn't vote for the e-scooter trial previously. I will be voting for this when it comes forth in the substantive. I do believe that there are successes around it. It's not completely failure. In fact, there's been a lot of successes, and you know the vibrancy aspect is one, but I still think that we should be concentrating on our health and safety.
Thank you, Councillor Sparrow.
Thank you, Thank you for the chance to speak on this. I agree that e-scooters do have their place, but there are major concerns to be addressed, which is what we're endeavouring to do here. And obviously, if everyone rode them sensibly and considerately in places where there's plenty of room to ride them, then we wouldn't have problems. But unfortunately, that's never going to be the case, or often not going to be the case. Therefore, we need to have rules. And I do think that the rules we already have and ones that we are going to perhaps be refining, we do need to get across better than we're currently doing. I have ridden around the waterfront to get me from one place to the next more quickly than I would be getting by walking. I've done that 2 or 3 times, and I cannot recall whether I've ridden very sensibly and considerately, because I don't want to have a mishap or to hit anyone or to come off in a public place. Probably wouldn't be a good look. But I don't know whether the speed I was travelling at was 9 or 10 kilometres an hour or 14 or 15. If I had the opportunity now, and I might take it upon myself in the next day or two to do that, to go to the waterfront and ride at a speed which is sensible and considerate, and actually see what speed I'm travelling at. So the point I'm making here is I'm interested in knowing, Councillor Wolf did refer to 10 kilometres an hour as being a useful speed to limit these to, but I'm seeking more advice from the experts on whether 10 or 15 is a better speed to limit them to. So yeah, that's basically it from me. We do need to put rules in place that are going to be enforceable, otherwise there's not much point, and to look at a speed which is going to be sensible and considerate for people to be riding at.
Thank you. We're now up to Councillor.
Was that Rush? Good, you sort of cut off because Councillor.
Yes, that's you, Councillor
So,
Rush.
thank you, Madam Chair. So I mentioned by email that I'd be foreshadowing an amendment. I've never done that before. So the amendment would be to replace 15 kilometres with 10, as I think Councillor Wolf suggested would be in his comfort zone. Madam Chair, what's the process here? Do I offer that as a foreshadowed amendment and speak to it now?
No, so you've done what you need to do. You've told us what the foreshadowed amendment is. If the 15 kilometres fails, then you get to speak to your foreshadowed amendment then. So at this stage, you've told us what's in your foreshadowed amendment. We know what the option is, and then you speak to it if this one fails. You can continue to speak to the amendment now, but you've told us what your one will be as a replacement.
Yeah, okay.
I'll just stop just to make sure that our support officers can confirm that what I have said is true. Cyrus, can you just confirm?
Correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
And Jill, sorry, I'm seconding that foreshadowed amendment. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm not going to speak to any other parts of Councillor Condi's proposed amendment other than the speed limit. So the original, I think originally Councillor Condi was going to propose 10 kilometres, but officer advice came back suggesting that stability would be impaired. We found out today, though, that the hospital area is a 10 kilometre zone, and we did hear from the Youth Council that that's an acceptable speed to be riding at. Looking at the paper, paragraph 66, page 16, there is some commentary on speed limits. I'll just read it out. Applying low speed limits, 10 to 15 kilometres, on public share e-scooters would be better for pedestrians, but could also have the unintended consequence of encouraging more people to ride on the footpath due to the increased speed differential with other users of the road. Obviously, that particular issue is not relevant to Councillor Condi's proposal. There's nothing in there that's suggesting that 10 kilometres is a speed that cannot be safely ridden at. Now, we did talk about this recently with Innovating Streets in the context of cyclists. But in that context, we were concerned about younger people, i.e., under 10 sort of kids, getting the speed wobbles. But the design of these scooters really rules out those sorts of our citizens using this type of vehicle. Cyclists actually who want to go faster can go on the roads and the cycleways as well. I guess in the end, where I'm at is really that we are trying to create a livable, walkable city, and our pedestrians are our priority. Now, if 10 kilometres is too low, we can revise up to 15 kilometres. But of course, you could say the same. If it's 15 kilometres is too high, we can go back to 10. Problem is, to raise that issue might actually be as a consequence of someone being seriously injured at 15 kilometres. So as a consequence, I'm not supporting the 15 kilometre element of Councillor Condi's amendment. I will be foreshadowing that it be changed to 10.
Thank you very much. We now go to Councillor Calvert and then Councillor Fitzsimons.
Look, I'm happy to support majority of these amendments, but I would like the last one taken separately, and that's the one about extending a public share e-scooter scheme, and that officers will provide costings and analysis of the implications for rapidly extending the cycling and micromobility infrastructure network in Wellington, and to develop a further program of work. This might be a very good idea, but it's actually a major piece of work and potentially a major cost. Now, that's something that we want to do as part of a cohesive look at what we want to see as our priorities in the next long-term plan, then so be it. But I don't think we should be doing this as part of this particular paper. This is about an e-scooter trial. Adding this last amendment, from how I read it, seems like this is a major piece of work. And look, I'm really concerned that, we have a cycling network program that we still haven't delivered on. The Newtown connection work has been put on hold. I won't talk about Island Bay Cycleway. So we've got some other pieces of work that we haven't even finished off, and yet we are asking officers now to do a bigger piece of work on some other stuff. And I know you should always have work in the pipeline, but some of our other pieces of work are still far from completion. So as I said, I have really, and unless there's some clarity, or Councillor Condi can provide me some assurance that this is not sort of trying to take a piece of work away from our deliberations around the long-term plan and what might be there in terms of our priorities. So yeah, as I said, in any event, I'd like this one taken separately when it comes to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, that's noted. Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, I just wanted to start by acknowledging the work that Councillor Condi has done on this. I knew it would be good having someone with a PhD and a background as a Treasury policy analyst on council, and she's proved that. And I guess I just wanted to comment on the speed limit issue, because I think it's really important to outline that we have officer advice that says it should be 15. Otherwise, there's issues with speed wobbles and with safety. And so to go against that officer advice, in my view, is very dangerous and sets a precedent that this council should think very, very carefully about. And just on that, I also want to raise some concerns about asking a public participant a question like whether it should be 10 kilometres without any context around it, and then and a question that goes against the advice we have from our own officers, and then quote him in support of your position. It doesn't really feel very appropriate to me, and I think it does a disservice to his public participation, because he was not given all of the information. He did not understand that our officers' advice is it should be 15. So I just find it a little bit unfair to try and quote him in support of a position in those circumstances.
And I too will just speak now. I have to say that I think the officer advice on this is really important to take. There is logical reason around the speed limit of 15 kilometres an hour. And I have grave concerns that we're not listening carefully to that advice. And I do also have concerns that the public participant did not have any other options put to him around any other slow speed limits. He didn't get an option between 10 and 15. It was 10 appropriate. And I think we just need to be careful that we're not taking something further than the person intended to answer. The way I heard what he was saying was he thought it was fair enough that there's a slow speed limit around the hospital, but he didn't know that we were going to be debating a difference between 10 and 15 kilometres an hour. So I really don't think we can extrapolate from his comments. And I do just want to acknowledge and thank Councillor Condi for looking at this really carefully. And I actually do really applaud the third amendment because it's really hard at the moment. We can see so many opportunities in the city, and we actually really do want to be having a holistic look at it all. And we do have programs which it is working through. And I want to make sure that officers know that there is real passion and energy in this council to really get this network up and going. And we will have some opportunities coming up to be able to deal with those things. And I welcome them, and I want that to be signalled. And I think this is a really good way of signalling that. So thank you very much. And we'll now go to your right of reply, Councillor.
Just a minute. Can I actually speak to the amendment?
Yeah, yes, sorry, I haven't seen other hands go up. So
yeah, no, I did put my hand up on the participant.
And now I'm seeing more. So can you put your hand up if you would like to speak to this amendment? So I have Deputy Mayor Free, Mayor Foster, and Councillor O'Neill. And Councillor Pannett, did you want to speak as well? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so is it possible to put the other screen back? I'm sorry to be a fusspot, but it feels a bit strange speaking to a piece of paper, which is what I was saying. All right, look, I just wanted to speak to the speed thing as well. And I do think that we run the risk of trying to be the experts here. And also in light of the Accessible Streets package, where they clearly have got a piece of work where they've done a lot of thinking about the speed. It may seem sort of counterintuitive to us that 15 kilometres might actually be safer than 10 kilometres, but we've heard about how people can be geofenced down to a very unsafe situation. We also don't know all the thought that's gone on to actually being safe to avoid pedestrians. It might be that if you go past a pedestrian too slowly, you're actually more inclined to wobble and actually run the risk of being less safe than at a speed like 15k. I really think we need to stick to some expert advice on the speed. And at the moment, people are going faster than 15. And I know that for a fact. It would be quite good to be consistent about the expectations around speed. And also at the moment, the behaviour and the dangerous or reckless driving or riding of scooters is not the main complaint. And as Councillor Wolf usefully said, it's not actually even the main cause of the accidents. It's actually the stuff, the littering and the left behindness of the scooters going all over the footpaths, the clutter. That is what the real issue that's been identified both in our call centre by the ACC data and actually by my own, and I'm sure other colleagues' emails and feedback we've had from the public. So I think we do need to take expert advice. I certainly won't. I'm hoping that we will support the 15 kilometres as a guideline rather than the 10. On the issue of whether we should be putting pressure on the staff and how much resource that's going to take to bring forward some thinking about further development, I'm a tiny bit nervous about this. I was glad to see that it's reasonably, it leaves a little bit of leeway for staff to decide how much effort they can put into it. I do think, however, it's a really important aspect that we do need to be providing more cycleways and scooterways. And again, it ties back with the accessible streets where it's clearly indicated where we clearly indicated in our submission that this is important. And we also clearly indicated in our submission that if we provide this kind of infrastructure, we'd actually expect scooters to be in it. And we supported the government's changing of the law to allow scooters to be legally in cycleways. So I am going to support Councillor Condi's third amendment with the proviso that we know staff are under a lot of stress at the moment. So they'll do what they can. It's a signal. I don't necessarily know that we're going to suddenly be able to see masses of new cycling infrastructure all at once. It will take time, but that's what I want to say about the amendments. And I thank Councillor Condi for her sterling work in all the transport areas and the support that she's provided to myself and to the Mayor in every single bit of piece of work that we're really doing around the city in this space.
Thank you, Mayor Foster.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to start if I can. Sorry, just unvideoed myself. I'm going to start if I can with a question. My question is for officers of this one. It's the third one of, so Jenny, thank you for raising these. It's the third one, and my nervousness, like the Deputy Mayor's, is the one of officers' capacity to do work. Because I noticed that we got yesterday an email around the accessible streets package, and the question was asked there, and I've got to flick back to what it said. The question was asked there is what did that do? And did that have any impact on existing work? And they said, yes, it did. And they said, in terms of other work this is pushing out, we've had to push out some of the planning work that is underway for bus priority early works and the long-term plan, which is essential if we are to adopt a systematic program approach to all our transport and place planning projects. So my question for officers is whether they have any concerns that the last part of the amendment actually will affect. We're trying to accelerate the Let's Get Wellington Moving project in terms of walking, cycling and public transport anyway. If we start taking it in a slightly different way, does this have any impact, or is it simply this is consistent with everything else? Because there are enough different ways of getting your head, getting enough different elements to get your head around already without introducing another one. So question of officers, if they can give us some advice about their comfort or otherwise with the last part of the amendment before I speak.
So I'm happy to speak to that. So we've discussed this with Councillor Condi, and I'll get Paul to comment if he feels he needs to as well. What this is trying to do is to shadow that we know that the implementation of this infrastructure is important for the city generally, but also for micro-mobility. There is a current program of work with Let's Get Wellington Moving, which prioritises walking and cycling and micro-mobility, and this just reflects that program of work. My understanding, I'll just get Paul to confirm, is that this is an existing piece of work that we were going to do anyway, particularly through the City Streets program. This is not additional work. Paul, is that correct?
Well, thank you, Moana. Yes, that is correct. So the City Streets IBC is to be developed in time for Council's LTP consideration, so that will feed into that. That's all.
Okay, well, look, if you're comfortable, then I'm comfortable too. It's not the greatest practice in the world, though, Councillor Condi, to be moving amendments to say what we're already doing, if that's the case. If it's something we weren't doing, that's one thing. If it's something we're already doing, and that's the way that it's understood, then we don't necessarily need amendments to say that. But the intent is right, and I support the intent. Look, I just want to speak to both the amendment and the substantive, if I can, at the same time, because I'm not going to take very long over it. Just seems to me this paper is, well, first of all, it's given us a lot of feedback from our wider community. And I think, like any transport issue, there are people on both sides of an argument, and it's pretty strong here that there are people who love e-scooters, there are people for whom they are a menace. What's useful is that we're getting the balance of where those two groups lie. But we also got, I think, some really good feedback about some of the things that people want us to deal with, and I completely agree with the Deputy Mayor that one of the things which does come through time and time again is the parking of these scooters, that they are simply dropped all over the place and they become a hazard for people walking as much as when they're actually being operated. But for me, I think that this paper is simply about allowing the current e-scooter, we've done the trial, but it's allowing the current e-scooter operation to carry on just for the next few months until the end of the year, before we actually get into, and obviously it will have to happen before the end of the year, we'll be getting into the process of looking for more permanent e-scooter partners, whether it is the current ones or whether it's different ones. You know, that will obviously be a process to go through. So this is just getting us through to the end of the year with a set of new or a few amendments to the existing contractual arrangements, particularly around the parking, which I think is particularly useful. So I think that's the way we should see it. Now, the other bit which I think is really useful, because that hasn't come up in the conversation to date, is that by the time we get to the end of the year, I hope that we'll be in a position where we will have put in place the safer speed limits in the central city. Obviously, we've got to make the decisions on that, but we've had the hearings on that. We've tried to do that as quickly as we possibly can. We did those hearings historically historically, in a historic fashion by Zoom. The first set of hearings we've ever done by Zoom, didn't we, Councillor Condi? And well done. And so we should be, and officers are working, assuming that we actually approve that, officers are working to implement that as fast as possible as well, in fact, faster than we were originally going to do. So, because we want to get stuff done. So by the end of the year, all things going well, we'll be in a position where we'll have had several months of operation of the safer speed limits in the central city. We'll also be, we will also know what and the government have made out of the accessible streets rules. And I just wanted to reflect on that, the speed limits, whether it's 10 or 15, that's not going to be set by us anyway. And I think while I sympathise with the 10, and I voted that way the other day, it feels like we're trying to relitigate a debate we've already had. So I would encourage us not to do that. And we concluded that 15 was the right answer. And that's what, at the moment, we are likely to see through accessible streets. If accessible streets changes, then we change accordingly. But if we feel that we don't want wheeled vehicles on any particular part of our streets, or any particular part of our pavements, then we have to say so. And those are the ones which we say, hey, you can't operate on. So we've already said that for, for example, the Golden Mile. And so it seems to me that we, I think we've got ourselves a good framework to operate from. And I think we should stop probably trying to tweak it at the moment. If there's things we need to change when we come to the end of the year with a more permanent proposition, then we can have another look at it there. But this is only effectively for the next few months and to improve the operation. And I think by and large, we've got two good operators who we've been working with. And I think it feels like we've done a better job than many other cities have done, maybe because we took our time over it and we were careful, and the officers, I think, have done a great job with doing that. So I think that's all I need to say at the moment, both in terms of the substantive and the amendments.
Thank you, Mayor Foster. Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora, thank you, councillors. Just to briefly touch on a few of the points raised as well, and to share some of the concerns as well that have also been raised. I first just wanted to raise a bit of a point. I'm just having a message with the Youth Council spokesperson today, Carl, and to remind councillors that those middling kids are most certainly still watching the live stream and other things like that. And he's just asked me to clarify a point. And so Carl said that 15 would be better limit than 10 on footpaths in general. And for most of the CBD streets in the city, it would be counterproductive to have that limit at 10, especially given it would be too slow for certain cycle lanes in some cases as well. And then to say, I also share the considerations as well that we are very privileged in parts of the city and in Motu Kairangi ward to have really strong cycling and micro mobility infrastructure, but that comes with a compromise and a balance. So I think both Condi and Rush, the two councillors that are looking, and Tanner and everyone actually that has looked into these amendments as well. Look forward to the vote.
Thank you, Councillor Pennant.
Thank you. Look, I'll just speak once during this debate. So I just want to, first of all, give a big thanks to staff and councillors Free and Condi for their work that they have done, because it is a very large amount. And I did find the survey information useful. Look, I am literally that close away from voting against this paper. I realise I possibly made a big mistake. It was a line call for me to support the trial because I saw on one hand it was good for young people, it was possibly good for the environment, and if it promoted mode shift, we need an electric future. But I was also cognizant that it wasn't good for disabled people, all disabled people. Some will be fine, and some older people. And I didn't realise that I was essentially helping to open the door to fundamentally change the way our streets are used. And I am very strongly opposed to footpaths not being footpaths anymore. And so I have had this issue with speed limits and all the rest of it, because I think footpaths are for pedestrians, they're not for cyclists, and they're not for scooterists. So this has been really difficult. I also am starting to kind of get that not only should we have a sustainable transport hierarchy, but we should have a people hierarchy as well. And when we think about our policy settings, you know, I think we do need to think about vulnerable or people who might be vulnerable, and that might be some disabled people, that might be some older people, it might be some children, whatever. But I think some people actually do have more rights to be thought about when we're in this space. However, I am going to, because this isn't a continuation of the trial, just I think people got a bit unclear, but and maybe it was the paper. This is actually deciding whether to go ahead with scooters in Wellington permanently. And so two things. One is that there was some public support for them continuing, so that has to have some weight. And also because Councillor Conley was kind enough to put some wording in an amendment. Without that, I would not have, definitely wouldn't have supported it, because for me, the solution is about lowering speed limits and actually getting a complete network for cyclists and people who use micromobility, a complete network in the same way that we have a network for pedestrians and the same as we have for car drivers and public transport users. And I think, you know, Councillor Connie and I had a debate about this morning. I think we can show that we can do this, and that's why I'm thrilled to hear that officers are doing this work. It's not about just putting a cycleway here and there and everywhere. It's got to be complete. There shouldn't be gaps between going from one suburb to another. That's not safe. Look, if you want cycling and, you know, scooters to be safe, then you have to build a really good, safe network for those of us who are most nervous. There's no way I'd get on a bike in the city. I think it's dangerous. I think we just have not done enough to keep people safe. So I really appreciate Councillor Conley doing that. I very much look forward to getting that advice. For me, this is about, again, tuputoa. If we're going to build back better, we should spend some serious money on getting this network sorted. And that may mean compromising on car parking, but I would prefer that to people going on footpaths. So, so that's just basically the guts of where I'm coming from. I appreciate listening to the debate. I will be supporting a lower speed limit. I still think the 15 is just too high. But if we can get more cycle paths built, then that problem will go away. Thanks, everyone.
I just need to mention, Councillor Pennant, because you spoke to the substantive, you can't second the foreshadowed amendment. I don't think that's going to be an issue, but
oh, sorry, I thought I was speaking to the amendment. I thought I was speaking to the amendment because
you were, but you have actually spoken to the substantive as well.
Oh,
but I don't know that it's going to be an issue. We'll just see how we go. But it's just to let people know where we're at, and there might be someone else who will be able to second it. But I just needed to make sure I was clear now. So what we're going to do now that we've had the debate, Councillor Conley can do hopefully a quick right of reply, because I know that people probably want to go and have something to eat, and then we'll come back and continue with the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Day. All right, I wanted to start just by talking about trips not taken, because I think it's a really important issue and it's something that I do think about, and Councillor Matthews mentioned it in her speech. And I think, you know, this is where I'm really looking at it. If we take e-scooters completely off the streets, then there's going to be a lot of trips not taken. Young people are telling us there's going to be trips not taken. If we keep them on the streets, then we're hearing from our older people and some disabled people that they will have trips not taken. So it's about trying to find how can we kind of reduce overall the trips not taken. And I'm hoping that bringing in the speed limit and some of the other things that are in the paper about parking and other things will actually hopefully increase the trips taken by all of those groups, while acknowledging that it's never going to be perfect for everybody. I do want to talk as well about the hospital low speed zone that Carl was talking about, just to say that I have spoken to officers about that, and the issue that he had where he was speed limited on the street apparently shouldn't be happening. So they are going to actually look into whether there's something that tweaks we can do there about the geofencing. That was the first time that they've heard about that happening. So it's great, again, when we get people coming in and telling us these things, it means that our officers can actually make those kinds of changes. So I really appreciate that. I will come back to speed limits again. I wanted to just move on to the final bit of my amendment that was about looking at how we can more quickly roll out the cycleways and other safer speed things. And I think, look, I acknowledge I'm not trying to get ahead of the LDP and the prioritizing decisions that we're going to have to make in that process. I'm more just signaling that I want to see some work to feed into that process so that we have the information to be able to make those decisions when it's that time. And just saying that we want to be bold and ambitious. It's what we're hearing, that we can see how quickly micromobility is growing, and we have to find ways to provide that infrastructure. And just to give some assurance to the public as well, I feel like the transport space is under a lot of pressure. We've talked about the staff being under a lot of pressure, and I talk to the staff a lot about how can we go faster and can we go faster with these programs, and they're always saying that they would love to go faster, but they're going as fast as they can right now. So we need to have those conversations, and maybe we need to have some conversations about capacity if this is an area that we're really wanting to see major progress during the long-term plan. So for me, it's all about just making sure we're getting that good advice coming into those decisions for the long-term plan. That's the intention, right? Not to jump the gun on those conversations. I'll come back to the speed limit now. So obviously there's a lot of disagreement here. I would just say that, you know, the 15 is going to be a limit and not a target. You won't have to go 15 along the waterfront. At the moment, the waterfront does have a recommended speed of 10k, but we know that nobody's actually doing 10k. I know that when I rode a scooter along the waterfront, I got up to the heady speeds of 12 kilometers per hour. Oh my goodness. So I think I think that 15 kilometers per hour, it's not always packed along there. It's not always full of people. And so sometimes it will be perfectly fine to go 15, and other times it's really busy and you shouldn't be doing that speed. That said, I think it's really, for me, it's really important that there is a speed limit, because I would like to see how it works along our waterfront. As Councillor Rush said, we're still in a learning process with this. So if the 15 speed limit doesn't get sufficient support, I will be voting for the 10k speed limit, because I would rather have a speed limit than not. That's really where my view is. But personally, I think that the 15k limit is appropriate for along the waterfront and Oriental Parade. It's quite a different situation than the 10k limit, which they've installed at the hospital, where obviously there's very specific concerns about the hospital grounds, and that's also private property that speed limit applies to, which is not the same as these public spaces. So the only final thing I wanted to say is that in the substantive, we've talked a bit about parking, and these amendments don't do anything about parking beyond just a little bit of commentary around Oriental Bay. But there is recommendations in the substantive about parking that I just wanted to remind everybody exist. So recommendation 7 is about officers doing work to look at finding solutions to parking so that we can get clutter off our footpaths across the city. And that was a recommendation that came in after conversations that Deputy Mayor Free and I had with officers early in developing this paper, to just say that we acknowledge that parking and these trip hazards and the clutter is such an important issue, and that there is work happening in this space already through Innovating Streets, and that officers are going to be looking to see what they can do in the meantime to find solutions for that as quickly as we can. So just to acknowledge that as well. And I think that is everything that I have to say. Thank you everyone for the debate and the constructive comments.
Kia ora, thank you very much for that. Just to let you know, after we've voted on this, we will break for lunch, and we will do half an hour from when we break. I hadn't expected that this would go quite so long. We're lucky we didn't have the extra paper. But anyway, what we'll do is we'll vote now, and as Councillor Calvert requested, we will take the third amendment separately. So we'll do it's now 3A and 9 together, and then we'll do 10 separately. Councillor Pennant.
Sorry, could we take 3A?
Separately?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Totally fine. Okay, so we'll start with 3A, and we'll if everyone can vote accordingly now on 3A, so you can see it there.
That is 12 councillors for and 3 against.
So that's carried.
Rush.
Okay, so that's carried. All right, so now we will vote on amendment number 9, and that's around the Oriental Parade, looking at the low-cost interim parking solutions. So if you can now vote accordingly.
14 councillors for and 1 against. Councillor Rush against.
Thank you. And now we'll vote on number 10. Just clear that. Yep.
That is 13 councillors for and 2 against. Councillors Young and Clifford against.
Great, thank you. So that's carried as well. So councillors, what we'll do now is we'll break until, we'll make it 1:15 because we do have a workshop coming up at 2. So yeah, make sure that you turn your mic off and your camera off and go on and enjoy half an hour stretching and some kai and some space. See you soon, matua.
$1.15.
So what I did last time was I gave it till the end of 1:15 and then I started because I figured that that was still on time.
Town is very busy, but I'm a bit lonely, I have to say.
Yeah, you lost your friend. So great feather duster you've got there, Councillor Sparrow.
Mine's green. What colour has everyone else got?
Mine's rainbow.
I used to sell them.
The rainbow ones?
No, telescopic lambswool dusters.
That's awesome.
They were $20 in the
Is that door to door?
Late 90s. Yeah.
I don't even know what our duster looks like. That's not my department.
I was remembering the other day, you remember those plastic bags that you used to sell door to door for school fundraiser?
Oh yeah.
People would look at that, yes, and pegs. People would look at that very differently now, but it was a big fundraiser.
They were good quality pegs, you know.
Yeah. All right. Looks like we've probably got, I think if Councillor Wolf is there, we've got a quorum. Have we got a quorum, Cyrus?
Definitely got a quorum.
Yep. Great. Well, we're going to get underway because we do have a fairly busy afternoon. So I'm going to ask Councillor Paul now. I know that Councillor Paul has an amendment and needs to move into a next appointment. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Let me just arrange my things on my screen so I can see everything. Yeah, so I am bringing forward myself and Councillor Foon's amendments as one nice package. The first is on infrastructure for parking and docking of micromobility, and the second is on the model, the commercial e-scooter models themselves, and trying to move towards a more sustainable option. So just wanted to mihi or acknowledge Deputy Mayor Free for the paper and the work done by officers, thank you, and also to Councillor Matthews for acknowledging that it is International Accessibility Day, which is awesome. And some of you know already that, oh yes, there's the amendment. Some of you, and if we could get that promptly down so I can see my colleagues again, that would be awesome. So some of you already know that I have rheumatoid arthritis and connective tissue disorder. So I actually am one of the people in the disabled community that use the e-scooters quite a lot to zip from meeting to meeting. But I think I stopped using them when I came on council because I have realised that actually there are no safe ways of riding a motor vehicle on a footpath. You know, you can be respectful, you can use your bell and you can weave in and out, but at the end of the day, it's always going to be tricky and you don't know what pedestrians are dealing with. I had someone email me about a surgery that they had and they were disoriented, and every time something would zoom by them, it would just totally throw them off. So I want to say that although that's my perspective as a person with physical disabilities, it's definitely not representative of the whole community, and I think Councillor Matthews encapsulated that perfectly. Thanks to Moana and the officers for helping me find a suitable recommendation. I know there was significant time put into this to make it work, and stoked to be moving this amendment with my waste-free Welly colleague, Councillor Poon. Last week we had 30 is the least hurdy, but I'm back with another catchphrase, and we've got more docs, less knocks. So I know that at the start of the lockdown period, a lot of us saw that one of our lovely and awesome nurses at the Wellington Hospital, their e-bike was stolen, and I think that really just highlighted the lack of infrastructure for micromobility, both e-bikes, e-scooters and bicycles more generally. So my amendment is ultimately saying, hey, look, we've got providers out there that are New Zealand, locally owned and operated. It aligns with our procurement resolution that was moved recently, and they are putting this infrastructure in. They've done it in Christchurch, they're doing it in Auckland, they're doing it in Queenstown, Rotorua, all the major tourism spots across Aotearoa, and I think it would be awesome if we could get in there on that kind of infrastructure, because we know that it can be deployed relatively quickly, as opposed to what the paper is saying here, which is January 2021. We also know that some of these solutions that exist in Aotearoa at the moment can come at no cost to the ratepayer or at no cost to officers' time putting these in, which I think is an advantage given the economic circumstances of the times. So I guess that's pretty much it. An example of what I'm talking about is the Locky Docks, which we heard from Cleve this morning about the Locky Docks. I'm not saying they're the option, you know, that they're it, but I'm saying that they're just an example of the awesome work that's going out at the moment. I know that Regional Councillor and Chair of the Regional Transport Committee, Councillor Roger Blakely, wrote a letter supporting the Locky Dock infrastructure to ECA when they put their application in, and I know they collaborate with Mercury, but also they've got some exciting projects coming up around the country, I believe, with Mana Whenua collaboration. So I thought that was quite cool as well. Not saying that this is the full solution. Look, I think it's part of the solution. I don't think there are any silver bullet solutions out there. If there were, I think we'd get to it. We would have gotten to it by now. I'm sure our officers would have found it. But I'm just saying that I think this is a good solution. It's a quick solution. And I'm cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of other projects going on, accessible streets, innovating streets, and city streets as part of Let's Get Wellington Moving. But as we know, many of these initiatives occurred after we brought e-scooters, commercial e-scooters onto our roads. And so I think we can put that infrastructure in there, and that they would fit in quite nicely with the other overarching projects. And also we heard from Flamingo, and they said they were open and willing to work and collaborate with possible infrastructure vendors who are out there and willing to put that work in. So yeah, I think when I look around the central city as a person who frequently uses these kinds of modes of transport, I see lots of open, big public spaces. I don't think the infrastructure, you know, we need to have a conversation about whether it goes on footpaths or on parking. I think there's lots of very open public spaces. One that I immediately think of is by Tommy Millions on the intersection of Courtney and Taranaki Street. That has ample room, which is filled up with park benches and the art displays. Another is the waterfront, another is Vivian Street by the Briscoes, and all along Taranaki Street. And I know that there's the implications from advertising, but I was actually thinking about it. You know, we've got this 23-year contract with Media who do all the advertising currently, but when you think about where those advertisings are placed, they're along all the congestion choke points in town. You know, they're all along Gusney Street, they're all up Taranaki Street. That's where all of the advertising is. And I ask myself, well, do we support a system that actively supports congestion and reliance on motor vehicles? So I think that's all I'll say. This is in line with my climate change portfolio. It lines up with our climate declaration, emergency declaration, and with Te Atakura First to Zero plan. And yeah, I think from the feedback I've heard over the last few days, people want parking and docking. That's relatively straightforward. We can have bars with indents, park the scooters, get them off the footpath, have them stood up and securely parked. It's not the whole solution, but it could be part of it, and it could be piloted. And I think that's all I'll say. Keen to hear people's thoughts and respond to those later. Ngā mihi.
Thank you. Councillor Foon, would you like to speak? You're seconding.
Kia ora tātou. Yes, what I would like to do is really thank all of our officers for an excellent and thorough management of this trial and the report that they've brought to us. It's pretty intense, so you've really done an amazing job to help us make the best decision we can, well-informed decision today. I also thank Councillor Paul for all the work she has done on really trying to bring a solution, a really quick, fast solution to one of the problems. The biggest problem that we saw was coming from this paper. And that is to really get some e-scooter micro-mobility parking up and running as soon as possible. So also just that there is a value to how well-designed and values-aligned infrastructure can add to validate best practice and behaviour and add to the vibrancy of Wellington. And so this is what we're looking to, as Councillor Matthews said, really kind of mitigate those challenges that we're seeing ahead of us. And I just want to say that there are many private organisations out there like Big Street Bikers that are determined to provide a purpose-led service through partnerships that are values aligned. And this is the modern way of doing business now. People are wanting win-win-win. And I'm really keen to see Wellington City Council engage. Sorry, Councillor Condi, you've just thrown me off. Really keen to see Wellington City Council engage with these organisations that are trying to do the best to accelerate the shared values that we have. And also as an active transport user for quite a few years, my experience of seeing the infrastructure starting to appear really validates who you are and what kind of mode of transport, and you do feel like you belong. And as I said before, I think the behaviour is better. So thank you, Councillor Paul, for working hard to bring this forward. And also the other amendment that I have put in there, I think we all saw the big piles of scooters that looked like they were on the way to the landfill. That is heartbreaking. This is not a practice we can continue. And I think an industry like our e-scooter industry has a really good opportunity to engage with circular economy practices. And I really appreciate that our staff are keen to put this in their procurement process, and that actually what we need to do is design waste out of the system. So those are the, thanks Councillor Paul for the first amendment, and mine is really trying to get Welly to go towards zero waste again. Kia ora tātou. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Matthews.
Just want to speak very briefly to thank my colleagues for this amendment. And I was sort of thinking about the diverse nature of this council, like the different people that are here. And I think we've seen today that that creativity, the diversity of the different humans and their kind of life experience and the things they bring and that they're passionate about has led to some amendments that really improve on this trial. So I think it's just really exciting to see, and to see the leadership throughout council to try and improve things for everybody and try and look at the problems and think of creative ways to solve them. So I just want to thank you, and I support this 100%.
Kia ora. Would anyone else like to speak to this? Great. Okay, we'll put these two amendments to the vote. So please vote accordingly.
Sorry, can we have the screen again, please?
Oh, you want to see them? I probably also just need to check, Mayor Foster, are you there? Just so we know whether we're waiting for your vote or not. Yes. Yes.
I am here.
Good, that's good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just waiting for Councillors Rush and Gilbert.
Councillor Rush, have you?
So it's 14 councillors for and 1 against. Councillor Gilbert against.
So that's carried. Thank you very much. All right, so the next person I have on the speaking order is Councillor Wolfe. Did you want to speak to the substantive now? No. Okay. That's fantastic. Is anyone else needing to speak to the substantive, or are we ready to? Oh, sorry, Deputy Mayor Free. Would you like to? I just want to check if anyone else wants to speak first, and then you'll do your right of reply. But it looks like no one else. Oh, Councillor Rush, you'd like to speak to the substantive, and then.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just a question. So, in terms of process, because I've heard various times throughout today that this is a vote not for the trial, and then I've heard also that it's just the trial. What I'd like to understand is if we go forward with this and it's all goes pear-shaped in 12 months' time, we will simply have to bring it back to the council and re-debate it. Is that it?
Well, that's probably something that Deputy Mayor Free can address in her right of reply. Can you do that, Deputy Mayor Free? Is that okay if she does that?
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So look, I'm not going to have a long right of reply because I think we've had a really thorough debate. I think all 15 of us have had something to say, which is healthy and probably a good thing. And also over 7,000 Wellingtonians have actually had something to say on this. So I think everybody who's booked amendments, I think, they've been thoroughly discussed and all of them had merit. But really what I always forget to do is thank the staff. So other of my colleagues have mentioned this, but this has been probably over a year's worth of work. By the time the original companies were selected, through a very robust process, through to the whole monitoring and evaluation process, which I've never seen such a paper full of information. Thank you very much, Hugh. Hugh Wilson's done a lot of the work on this. Thank you to Paul Barker and to Moana. It has given us a lot of confidence that we do understand the various views in our community, and we have a lot of confidence too about how the scooters have been operated and the pitfalls, the pros and the cons of that. So just to answer Sean's, I took notes along the way, but we really are running short of time. But just to answer Sean's question, my understanding is this paper, allows for us to see through the original trial period, which was to the end of the year, but in principle, to allow officers to proceed with reappointing or retendering for whatever, offering again the opportunity for companies to take up the opportunity to have scooters in Wellington. I do imagine that when they get to that point, they'll come back to us with contracts that there will be some sort of approval process for. I'm not entirely sure of that point, but I dare say I think you should think that might be what happens. But I don't know if it's worth asking for a little bit of clarification for that now after I finish speaking and just before we vote. Is that allowed under our processes or not?
Probably really at this stage,
probably
that's
not.
Probably all we need. I'm sure that Councillor Rush can find that out later.
I am imagining they'll come back to us with whatever the results of the tender are going forward. But in case that isn't the case, I think we can probably trust their judgment. All right, so I'm just going to ask everyone, I guess, to support the recommendations, the additions and the originals, and we'll put it to the vote.
That's great. So I'm going to propose that we put these amendments in with the substantive and we vote on them all together. We have had the opportunity to vote on them separately, so people do know. If you were in opposition to something, it is recorded, and well, people can go back and watch it. So I think probably in the interest of people's time, we'll just do one block. Are people comfortable with that? Great. Okay, so we'll put this, obviously Cyrus is scrolling through. Thank you, Cyrus. Just to remind people what we're voting on. But yes, already got 6 votes, so
Madam Chair,
thank
if I
you.
can clarify. So D is Councillor Condi's amendment to 3. And then 8, then 9, 10, 11, and 12 are also amendments that have passed.
Great, thank you. Looks like we're just waiting on a couple more councillors. And one more. Yeah.
That's unanimous. Cool.
Looks like that was unanimous. Thank you. All right. My instincts are just to rush into the last bit, but I know the officers are working in the background trying to catch up on all the little administrative bits. So I'm just, not rush them at the end there.
Just ask a question. Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Just in terms of how we record that, and I thought it was quite good how they recorded who voted against those individual resolutions before we put it to a total vote. So would that appear in the final minutes like that as well?
That is definitely the way for council minutes. Cyrus, do you want to?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, for council automatic division, Councillor Calvert, you should have asked for division, but that's okay. I put all of those as division because I know the intent was for your vote against to be recorded. So
no, I mean, yeah, no, it's just I wanted just to make sure that it's quite clear right up front. For the speed of from an administration point of view, I voted for all of those.
Thank you.
At the final, but I just want to make it clear that which ones we actually did support and didn't support.
So just to clarify for councillors, for our city strategy and policy committee, it's not a given. For council, everything is taken by division, so you do need to ask. But I guess the point that I made before we were voting is that people can go back and see online and they can hear your comments, and that is the advantage of the current way that we're doing things. It's very, very clear and open and
I appreciate that, but if no one's going to probably potentially go through a 4-hour meeting. So all I'm just saying is I think it's a good idea to, as the officers had in that one, which ones who had voted against resolutions that had passed initially. That's all.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, me whakakapi tēnei hui. Mā Councillor Foon te karakia e mutunga. So Councillor Foon's going to finish us off with the karakia.
Kia ora. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wātea, kia mama, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua. I te ara takatū, koia rā e rongo, whakaira aki ki runga, kia wātea, ai rā kua wātea.
Ngā mihi ki a koe, Councillor Foon, thank you for that, and thank you, councillors. Really good, vigorous debate today, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. And thank you to the people out in the public who have been watching this the whole way through. Really appreciate your time and your interest in this decision-making process. Councillor Young, did you have a question? You're just waving goodbye.
No. Don't we have a meeting at 2 o'clock?
We do.